Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the committee's sixth meeting in 2021. Can I ask everyone please to make sure their mobile phones are on silent? This meeting will be conducted in virtual format throughout. Apologies have been received from Mike Rumpel. Now, at the start of the meeting, I would like to do some declarations of interest relating to the whole meeting, and I'm going to start that off with making a declaration on items 6 and 7. And I would refer members to my register of interest in that I am a member of a farming partnership in Murray, and I have an interest in wild salmon fishery. Stuart Stevenson, I think you'd like to make a declaration in relation to item 5. Stuart.
Yes, Convener, I manually switched my mic on. I declare my presidency of the SAPT, vice presidency of Rail Future, and I have a registered agricultural holding from which I derive no income. Thank you.
Peter Chapman, I think you'd like to make a declaration of interest in relation to item 6.
Absolutely, Convener. In relation to item 6 on agriculture issues, I declare an interest in a farming partnership in North East Scotland.
Thank you very much. And Richard Lyle, I think you'd like to make a declaration in relation to item 3. Richard.
Yes, thanks, Convener. In regard to low emission zones, I'd like to declare I'm the convener of the Showman's Scottish Section Showman's Guild Cross Party Group. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Richard. And Jamie Halcrow-Johnson, I think you'd like to make a declaration in relation to item 6.
Yes, thank you, Convener. I'm a partner in a farming partnership in Orkney and member of a number of agricultural bodies.
Thank you very much, Jamie. We now move on to agenda item 1, which is European Union Withdrawal Act 2018. This is the sift of one Brexit-related SSI, as detailed on the agenda. The Scottish Government has allocated the negative procedure for this SSI. Is the committee agreed that it is content with the parliamentary procedure allocated to the instrument by the Scottish Government? If you're not, please put an N in the chat box. We are content. Therefore, we'll move on to agenda item 2, which is the consideration of subordinate legislation to negative instruments as detailed on the agenda. No motions to annul have been received in relation to these. Does any member have any comments they wish to make? I'm not seeing anyone who wants to make any comments. I therefore propose that the committee does not want to make any recommendations in relation to these negative instruments, and I assume that we are therefore all agreed. We are agreed. I'd like therefore to move on to agenda item 3, which is the subordinate legislation and the consideration of 2 affirmative instruments as detailed on the agenda. The committee will take evidence on the low emission zones, emission standards exemptions and penalty charges Scotland Regulations 2021 and the National Bus Concession Scheme for Younger Persons Scotland Order 2021. These motions seeking the approval of the affirmative instruments will be considered in items 4 and 5. Now, I'd like to welcome from the Scottish Government Michael Matheson, the Cabinet Secretary for Transport, Infrastructure and Connectivity, Stephen Thompson, the Head of Environmental and Sustainability Branch, Anne Cairns, a Solicitor, Tom Davey, the Head of Business Strategy and Concessions Policy, Debbie Walker, the Operations and Business Manager, and Rosalind Wood, a Solicitor for the Scottish Government. Now, Cabinet Secretary, I would invite you to make a brief opening statement on the 2 affirmative SIs. And if I can just say before I do, we are incredibly tight during the course of this meeting, and I would remind you from now on to the end of the time that you're with the committee, brevity is always good, and therefore, Cabinet Secretary, would you like to make your brief opening statement?
Thank you, Convener. The Scottish Government has committed to introducing low emission zones in Scotland's 4 biggest cities between February and May 2022. A key milestone in the delivery of such zones is the progression of the low emission zones regulations. The Transport Scotland Act 2019 will enable local authorities to introduce such zones, with this order helping to deliver low emission zone in a nationally consistent manner. This means that the order outlines standardised emission standards, exemptions, penalty charge rates and enforcement activities that must be applied to all Scottish low emission zones. The SSI also sets out a route to appeal against a low emission zone penalty via the first tier tribunal. New separate regulations will be developed during 2021 and 2022 to establish the low emission zone appeal procedures in more detail. The National Bus Concessionary Scheme for Young Persons 2021 order will enable us to deliver our commitment to creating a statutory national concessionary travel scheme for young persons under 19 as stated in the programme for government. Providing free bus travel to under 19s will help to strengthen our response to the climate emergency, supporting our green recovery by enabling sustainable travel habits in young people. The order also makes changes to the existing older and disabled persons scheme, providing companion cards to eligible disabled children aged under 5, extending current reimbursement terms into 2021-2022, and minor changes to the definition and operation of the scheme. And I would commend both orders to the committee, and I'm happy to answer any questions, Convener.
Thank you very much, Cabinet Secretary. The first question is from Richard Lyle, and then I have a question. Richard.
Thank you, Convener. It's more a compliment rather than a question. Cabinet Secretary, can I thank you on behalf of show people who in normal times set up fares within low emission zones, and basically due to COVID-19 haven't worked since last March, but that's by the by. But the situation that showman's good vehicles and showman's vehicles under the exemption section 3 have been included is a major win for them, and I thank you in acceding to my request for you to do that. Thank you.
I'm not sure that was a question, Mr. Lyle, but I have a question, Cabinet Secretary. Just on exemptions in low emission zones, could you just clarify what the situation is regarding recovery vehicles? So do all recovery vehicles have to be low emission vehicles? And does that mean that we could have the situation where recovery vehicles couldn't get in to recover vehicles that have been broken down and taken back to areas with low emission zones? Cabinet Secretary.
So the low emission zones, the national exemptions are for police vehicles, ambulance and emergency vehicles, Scottish Fire and Rescue Service, the NCA, military vehicles, vehicles for disabled persons, historical vehicles and showman's vehicles. There's no specific exemption for recovery vehicles for the purposes of recovering a vehicle from a low emission zone.
Okay, that was my understanding of it, Cabinet Secretary. My concern is that it may leave a lot of people unable to get their cars recovered unless through specific contractors. And would it be worth considering this further, because it is a serious issue when it comes to breaking down cars blocking roads?
I understand the point you're making. I'm not entirely sure whether it is necessary, because keep in mind that the way in which the emission standards have been set, it is for vehicles that are probably going to be within the last 10 years. My expectation is that most recovery vehicles would fall within that category. So I would be surprised if it became a major issue for recovery companies, because in my experience, most of the recovery vehicles are actually fairly new vehicles because of the way in which they operate.
Okay, you must come up to the Highlands. I don't think they're all that new, but I will leave that question there. Are there any other questions from committee members? I don't see any other questions, and therefore, what about on the bus travel concessionary scheme? Are there any questions on that? Silence, unlike the committee on that question. Therefore, we'll move on to agenda item 4, I believe, which is the formal consideration of motion S5M 23926 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary for Transport, Infrastructure, Connectivity, calling on the committee to recommend that low emission zones, emission standards, exemptions, penalty charges, Scotland Regulations 2021 be approved. Cabinet Secretary, I invite you to move the motion, and I'm not thinking that you'll want to make any further comment, but Cabinet Secretary.
I move the motion in my name, Convener.
Thank you very much, Cabinet Secretary. Are there any comments from any members? No, the question therefore is that motion S5M 23926 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are agreed, and that concludes our consideration of this agenda item. So I'll now move on to agenda item 5, which is the formal consideration of motion S5M 23952 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary for Transport, Infrastructure and Connectivity, calling on the committee to recommend the National Bus Travel Concession Scheme for Young Persons Scotland order be approved. Cabinet Secretary, I ask you to move the motion and make any further comments you may wish to. Cabinet Secretary.
Convener, I move the motion in my name.
Thank you. Are there any comments from any of the members? There are not. Therefore, the question is that motion S5M 23952 be agreed. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. Therefore, we will move on to agenda item 6. Agenda item 6 is an evidence session on the Scottish Government's draft budget 2021-22 and the implications of COVID-19 for the budget as this relates to the rural economy and connectivity. We will first take evidence from the Cabinet Secretary for Transport, Infrastructure and Connectivity. We will have a short suspension after the session with the Cabinet Secretary, and then we will take evidence from the Cabinet Secretary for Rural Economy and Tourism. I would like to welcome from the Scottish Government, Michael Matheson, the Cabinet Secretary for Transport, Infrastructure and Connectivity, Lee Shedden, the Director of Finance for Transport Scotland, Robbie McGee, the Head of Digital Connectivity Division for the Scottish Government. Cabinet Secretary, I would invite you to make a 3-minute opening statement. Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, Convener. The portfolio contributes to all of the national outcomes that form the National Performance Framework and leads on strategic infrastructure planning through the recently published Infrastructure Investment Plan to 2026, reflected in the latest Strategic Transport Projects Review with key themes of sustainable transport and economic growth and recovery within it. We will continue to contribute to increased social and economic opportunities and inclusive growth through the connected communities while progressing towards our net zero ambition. We will invest almost £3.2 billion in transport, including £1.6 billion supporting our rail and bus services as a vital enabler of economic growth and recovery. As part of our £2 billion low carbon fund, over the next 5 years, we will invest £120 million in zero emission buses and £500 million in bus priority schemes. We will also continue to support our plans to decarbonise rail passenger services by 2035. We will remain committed to road connectivity, investing £470 million, maintaining the Trunk Road network, in addition to completing schemes such as the dualling of the A9 between Perth and Inverness. And we'll take bold action to reduce both car usage and vehicle emissions. We will continue to support our essential ferry services and the road equivalent tariff for access to our islands and peninsular communities. And we'll continue to provide additional support for public transport following on from the measures that we implemented in March 2020. The new Emerging Energy Technology Fund of £180 million will support the development of hydrogen in Scotland to reduce emissions alongside our ambitious innovation and energy transition programme. And we are committed to working with all of our cities and regions to realise the benefits of deals, with £210 million committed for delivery in the final deals in 2022 and 2021 and 2022. And we are extending future-proofing digital infrastructure across rural Scotland through our £600 million investment in R100 broadband programme to deliver full fibre networks. And we'll also invest £30 million in delivering the National Islands Plan over the next 5 years, supporting island economies and communities. Convener, the Transport, Infrastructure and Connectivity Portfolio budget provides additional funding of £578 million to contribute to the national performance outcomes, reflecting the challenges faced post-pandemic, supporting a sustainable and green recovery. And of course, I'm happy to respond to any questions from committee members.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. And I just remind you that there are a lot of questions to get through here, and the first ones are from Colin Smith. Colin.
Thank you very much, Convener. Excuse me, and good morning, Cabinet Secretary. Can I start with a question on the issue of rail services budget for 2021-22, which shows that it's 33% higher than it was in 2019-20. So that's an increase of £325.9 million, which is more than the government invests in support for buses and concessionary travel. Can you clarify, Cabinet Secretary, what specifically this increase in funding is for?
Good morning, Mr Smith. The main elements that contribute to the increase over the 2 years relate to a share of the revenue shortfall against the bid projections, where we are required to provide the train operators under the terms of the franchise. So the gap in revenue which has been created during the course of the pandemic is largely why you're seeing that increase in funding which is required. This is one of the main reasons as to why we chose not to rebase the ScotRail franchise on the basis that we saw as being much more costly in going forward. So the principal reason is because of that fall off in revenue.
So just to be clear, that 325 is effectively continuing EMAs the remainder of this financial year. Is that what you're saying?
Principally, it's meeting the shortfall in revenue, which the EMAs have been doing since March last year. So that's the principal purpose behind this increase in funding.
Yeah, and you've obviously got a clear commitment to end the current Abellio ScotRail franchise in March 2022, which means a new model effectively coming into play on the 1st of April. So what provision is there within the budget for the development of what comes next after that franchise ends, because that franchise will end in this financial year effectively?
So the planning around that's already taken place within Transport Scotland, so that's met within our normal Transport Scotland budget. There's no additional funding required for us to take forward our planning arrangements and the issues that we're looking at for what we put in place following the end of this existing franchise.
But just to be absolutely clear, under no circumstances will you extend the current Abellio franchise beyond March 2022?
No, we've already made it clear that the franchise will come to an end next year.
In this term, you mentioned the work of Transport Scotland. The second point in my question is there's a 20% increase in the administration budget for Transport Scotland. Can you explain what that's for?
Yeah, the principal reason for this increase is that Transport Scotland have been operating with a structural deficit for a number of years, and they've used a range of savings in previous years in order to help to meet that shortfall. However, they were non-recurring savings which were identified in previous financial years, and the increase in the 20% increase in their budget is a reflection of closing off the structural deficit that we're operating with. So it's also to deal with some of the additional work that they're taking forward around the STPR2 process and work around the National Transport Strategy, but it's principally to deal with the structural deficit they've been operating with.
Yes. Thank you, Convener. That's me.
Thanks, Colin. The next questions come from Richard Lyle. Richard.
Thank you, Convener. Cabinet Secretary, we're now 1 year into COVID-19 since it has affected our way of life. Many sections have also been affected, not least transport, which needs paying customers to survive. So how long might the Scottish Government continue providing coronavirus-related financial support to bus, light rail and rail operators, and how much might this support amount to, and what impact might this expenditure have on future transport investment plans?
We are committed to maintaining financial support for the public transport network, given the financial challenges which it faces during the course of the pandemic. It's difficult to say at this precise moment exactly how long that will be required for, because a big part of it is dependent upon how we progress with management of the pandemic and what recovery looks like. So far, we've provided just short of £700 million of additional funding to support the transport network. It may be that as we move forward out of the pandemic, that recovery is not going back to the same levels of post-pandemic usage of the transport network, which will have an implication for how services can be provided and the funding around services. But there's a considerable level of uncertainty on that matter. One thing we are doing is that we've commissioned some research to look at some of the issues that could impact on transport recovery after the pandemic, which we hope to have completed in the weeks ahead. But there is a level of uncertainty still there, Mr. Lyle, so it's difficult. Yes, we can within the financial constraints that we operate.
Sorry, you dipped out for a wee while there. I didn't get the last of that, but I'm sure that I'll see it on the official report. Given the level of uncertainty regarding future transport trends, demand and behaviours as Scotland moves out of the COVID-19 pandemic, how confident are you to be able to produce a planned route map towards a 20% reduction in car kilometres by 2030, and what do you anticipate being the short and longer term budgetary implications of meeting that target?
So this goes back to the earlier question, is that there is still quite a bit of uncertainty on what public transport recovery will look like and how work patterns will change, behavioural changes which will all have an impact if people are working more from home, and there's some indications that may be the case, that there will be a sustained reduction in the number of people who will be commuting in the future. That could all have an impact on car usage and usage of the public transport system. I still think we can develop the route map by the end of this year on the 20% target. It may be that there will be potentially some limitations to the scope of that route map, but given the importance that it plays in helping to support us in achieving our net zero targets, I don't want to waste time or to delay developing that route map. So I'm confident we can get it complete, although there may be some caveats around it due to just ongoing uncertainty and how things will recover in the years ahead following the pandemic.
That's me, Convener. Thank you.
Thanks, Richard. Jamie Halcrow-Johnson, I think you wanted to come in there. Jamie.
Thank you very much, Convener. Good morning, Cabinet Secretary. Just a couple of very quick questions. You've talked a lot about the public transport network, but obviously private operators play a huge part in getting people about our country, both on the bus side, but also on the ferry side. So can I ask what provision or what help or support there is in the budget for private operators? And can I also ask in relation to ferries in particular, in the Northern Isles ferries, it's been repeatedly promised that there will be a reduction in fares on the Pentland Firth routes, but that hasn't been delivered yet. Obviously, there's court cases. But can I ask, has money to cover those reduced fares been included in next year's budget?
So You rightly point out that a large part of the public transport network is provided by private sector companies, particularly bus operators. There are a couple of private ferry operators as well. We have provided them with financial support and assistance during the course of the pandemic to assist them due to the significant drop-off in patronage levels. And we'll continue to look at that sympathetically as we go forward during the course of the pandemic. So as part of our COVID contingency funds, support for the ferry network is included within that. And that includes the private operators that you made reference to. You also correctly point out there are some legal issues still around aspects of the Pentland Firth. If it would be helpful to the committee and to the member, I'd be more than happy to take the issue away to give you an up-to-date position on where the legal issues are, in order to, just so that you can understand where we are in this particular point around some of the legal aspects of it. And any funding provision for changes to the fare structure on the Pentland Firth would come from the existing budget that we've allocated for ferry services. So it would have to become, any changes would come from within the existing budget.
Thanks very much. I think it would be certainly helpful to get an update on the legal side, because obviously it's been long running. So what you're suggesting is that that money is available within the existing budget and wouldn't require, if, for example, the legal situation changed and those reduced fares were able to be delivered, wouldn't require additional funding or cuts to any other part of the ferry network?
It depends on at what point within the financial year any changes would have to be introduced. So if it was having to be introduced immediately, there may be some difficulty in doing so because of financial pressures. But if it was late in the financial year, it would have to be just found within the existing budget as it stands. But I think if I provide you with an update on where the legal issues are, you'll then may have an understanding in terms of where the time frame around some of this may actually be.
Okay, thank you, Convener.
Okay, thanks very much. Just to say that I think we are having some issues with connectivity this morning, and obviously if Cabinet Secretary you drop off, it won't be picked up by the official report. So I might bring you in if I think that we're missing something that you said. But John Finney's got the next group of questions. John.
Thank you very much indeed, Convener. Good morning, Cabinet Secretary and your officials. Cabinet Secretary, how does the budget support the delivery of projects included in the Phase 1 report of the Strategic Transport Projects Review, those which were chosen because they could be delivered or progressed in the short term? I'm thinking, for instance, of the Phase 1 of the Rail Decarbonisation Action Plan, or infrastructure to provide access at all railway stations. So how does the budget support the delivery of projects such as those, please?
Good morning, Mr. Finney. The budget aligns with the commitments we've made within STPR to Phase 1 report. So as you appreciate, a number of those projects will be taken forward over several years, given the nature and the complexity of delivering on them. So those that we have committed to, so there's a number of different elements. There are those which are already being progressed. So there's budget provision in the budget at the present moment for them. For those which we are committing to taking forward, there is provision in the existing budget to start the progression of that, although the funding for that may be over a couple of years for its completion. And of those which we are developing the business cases on, and there may not be funding for them, or there will not be funding for them in this year's budget, because they are very much at the agreeing to develop the business case for them, and it will be funding in future years. So some elements of the decarbonisation on the rail side are set out within our overall rail infrastructure funding, which will allow us to take forward elements of the decarbonisation. For example, we're progressing the electrification of the East Kilbride line, which is committed for within this budget to progress that forward. We have set out commitments to partial electrification of the Borders line alongside the use of battery electric trains. So this year's budget starts that process of developing that programme of work, which will have to take place over a number of years. So so what we have committed to is covered within this budget for what can be delivered in this year, but some of them are multi-year funding elements within it itself. And there are also some parts of the funding which is coming from the Low Carbon Fund, the £2 billion Low Carbon Fund, which is helping to support some of the active travel infrastructure which we are taking forward. So that's broadly how the budget is shaped, Mr. Finian, and how we've committed to some of the funding this year, but it will also need funding in future years as well.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. Cabinet Secretary, can I ask you about some of the projects which are reliant on action by local authorities and transport operators? I know I've often had sought to push on the issue of local authority roads, for instance, and you rightly say that it's their responsibility, but as Transport Minister with an overall responsibility, there must be a role for yourself. So with regard to phase one projects that are reliant on action by local authorities and transport operators, are you satisfied that these organisations have the funds to deliver these projects? And if not, how does the Scottish Government intend to support their delivery, please?
The commitments that are set out within the STPR2 Phase 1 report are actual financial commitments to the Scottish Government rather than to local authorities. Some of them will need to be planned and taken forward in a collaborative fashion with local authority partners, but the delivery of the projects and the costs associated with it are for the Scottish Government to meet. So I would expect any additional costs that may have an impact on a local authority, say for example on an element of road that they need to provide, would be covered within the project itself because it's a requirement that we are taking forward. So I would be confident that we would be able to provide the financial assistance that may be necessary for any contribution that a local authority needs to make, because these are projects which are national projects that are being funded by the Scottish Government.
Okay, thank you very much. That's very helpful. That's me. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you very much, John. Cabinet Secretary, the next questions are actually from me. Within the budget, there's £47.4 million set aside for Ferguson Marine. Now, is that for the construction of the Glen Sannox and Hull 802, or is that for the general running of the shipyard?
So the capital budget allocation of £45 million is forecast to be spent on the construction of the MV Glen Sannox and Hull 802, with the £1.5 million of non-cash budget which relates to a general depreciation of the shipyard's assets. The allocation covers also the general running of the shipyard itself. There is around £1.9 million of allocated resource budget, which is there to cover the other costs of supporting the shipyard, including Scottish Government staff costs and also the cost of professional advisors associated with the yards. So that's how the budget breakdown for Ferguson Marine has been set out.
Okay, on the basis that we heard that there was approximately £112 million more to be spent on the building of 802 and Glen Sannox and 802, you accounted for 45 million. That means I think there's about £67 million still to come out for those ferries. Will those be coming out next year? And if they are, what additional funds will you have to put into the yard in those years as you are doing this year, just to keep it going?
So the funding that's been allocated is for this financial year. So funding for going forward into the next financial year will be set out in the future budget for Ferguson Marine. So any additional costs which will be incurred for construction and also for operations at the yard will be covered in future years. But the funding allocation which is set out within this budget is to deal with the costs associated directly with this financial year.
Yeah, I think I understood that, Cabinet Secretary. What I'm asking you is, are you predicting in future the same amount of money being spent each year in the yard to help it out with the construction of the Glen Sannox and 802?
That depends on the future shape of the yard and the progression that's made in the yard in terms of attracting further work at it. So the ongoing costs associated with the yard will be dependent on a range of factors that would have to be determined at that stage. What I can't say to you is that I can guarantee that it will be at £1.9 million next financial year because there's a level of uncertainty around that. But clearly the Scottish Government's given an ongoing commitment to supporting the yard for the completion of these two vessels.
Okay, so there will be continuing funds going in there. So, and just on CMAL, voted loans for 21-22, 21.9 million. How much of this is going to Ferguson Marine for the construction of Glen Sannox and 802? Just trying to find out how much money is going on those two ferries this year, Cabinet Secretary.
Okay, in relation to the £21.9 million of voted loans, it's not anticipated that any of that will be going to pay for Ferguson Marine for the construction of the two vessels.
Could you tell me what it's going for, Cabinet Secretary?
The funding is for the £21.9 million is for ongoing works that will be taken forward by CMAL for other activities that they're taking forward. It's not specifically for the two vessels at Ferguson Marine.
Okay, I'm not being difficult, Cabinet Secretary. £21.9 million is a lot of money, and you're saying it's going on ongoing expenditure. Could you tell me what that ongoing expenditure is, please?
I don't have that information to hand, but I'm more than happy to come back to the committee with details on that.
Okay, thank you. Seems a lot of money with no explanation, and I look forward to hearing that. Richard Lyle, you've got the next question, please.
Well, I'm coming on to a subject of another jewel in the crown that the Scottish Government has continually supported, and that is Prestwick Airport. Cabinet Secretary, the last time we discussed Prestwick Airport, there was concern, a particular concern from myself, that there was no provision put in the 2020-2021, 21-22 budgets for the airport. Despite the sale of the airport falling through and the near shutdown of passenger aviation due to coronavirus, do you think this airport can operate without government support, given the current situation? And what contingencies do you have in place should such support be needed to keep this important airport running?
Thank you for your question on this issue. In previous committee sessions, I've been challenged for ongoing financial support to the airport, and in this case, it's why we're not giving them ongoing financial support. The principal reason for that, Mr. Lyle, is that the management team at Prestwick Airport have made good progress in managing their operations and also in developing the specialist nature of the work that they've been carrying out. And they don't anticipate requiring any financial support in this financial year that they believe they can manage within their own budget.
Well, just to be consistent, Cabinet Secretary, I want to ensure that we do keep important things in Scotland open, including Ferguson Marine. Thank you, Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. Just before we move on, could I just clarify just my understanding on Prestwick Airport? I think the government has put in excess of £45 million. A lot of that will have been ongoing running costs. I don't see any change to the bottom line valuation in the accounts for Ferguson Marine for the valuation of the capital asset. Could you explain to me how much the capital asset has increased since the Scottish Government put the original value in at around £3 million?
Sorry, are you referring to Glasgow Prestwick Airport or Ferguson Marine?
No, Glasgow Prestwick Airport.
Sorry, you said Ferguson Marine at one point.
Sorry, let me rephrase it, Cabinet Secretary. We have put £45 million, or the government has put £45 million Prestwick Airport. The original valuation on the valuation sheet for the airport was around £3 million. The existing valuation appears to be consistent at £3 million. I'm asking, what value do you think has been increased by spending the £45 million, apart from keeping it open, which I welcome?
Well, I think nobody should underestimate that the Glasgow Press Week plays a critical part in the Ayrshire economy, particularly many of the aviation industries which are associated with it around the aerospace cluster at Press Week. If we were not to continue to support or provide assistance to Glasgow Press Week, or had it provided that over the years, I suspect we would have probably lost hundreds, if not potentially thousands of jobs within the Ayrshire economy. So the economic benefit of the government support for Glasgow Press Week goes beyond just the boundary fence of Glasgow Press Week Airport in itself. And the good thing is, which I'm sure the committee will welcome, is that the management team have now reached a point where they do not require ongoing financial support from the Scottish Government and are operating on a commercial basis. Now, clearly, the airport is presently up for sale because we believe it should return to the private sector. But I think it would be a very narrow way in which to consider Glasgow Press Week purely on the capital value of the actual facility itself, given the very important role that it plays within the wider Ayrshire economy.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. I absolutely agree it plays a huge role in it, but I'm trying to identify the capital value uplift from spending £45 million on it. We'll maybe leave that and move to the next questions to Emma Harper. Emma.
Thanks, Convener. Good morning, Cabinet Secretary. Just a couple of questions about active travel. I feel like we're here again from last week, but in the 10 years before the pandemic, the chart in our briefing paper shows that walking, wheeling and cycling has reduced between 2010 and 2019. But we have seen a key positive in our communities during the pandemic, and that was a growth in active travel, including cycling and increase in e-bikes. And we spoke about e-bikes and cargo bikes last week. How confident are you, Cabinet Secretary, that the active travel budget is being and will be invested in projects that will encourage further modal shift?
Well, good morning. I think there's no doubt in my mind that a critical element of helping to support people to make greater use of active travel is to provide the type of dedicated infrastructure that can assist making greater use of active travel. And that's why I recognise that we haven't saw the increase that we were looking for, although as you mentioned, we have saw an increase during the course of the pandemic, which is welcome and what we want to also continue to sustain going forward. Which is why we have gone in increasing the budget. We've gone from increasing the budget from £80 million to over £100 million over the course of the last couple of years. So we are trying to make sure that we see the type of step change in investment in infrastructure to try and encourage more people to participate in active travel. So that infrastructure investment, I would suggest, is a critical element in trying to get the growth that we need to see in people making use of active travel provision. And alongside that is giving that longer term commitment, that over £500 million being provided over the course of the next 5 years to allow the type of transformational infrastructure we're looking for, alongside an additional £50 million for active freeways to be provided. So although we saw growth in the course of the last year during the pandemic, active travel infrastructure, I would suggest, is going to be critical to helping to the type of increase that we're looking for in the years ahead.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. In our papers, I mean, you've talked about £100 million per year, so that's £500 million investment over the next 5 years. Does the budget need to have a separate line for active travel? Would that help in tracking the effectiveness of active travel investment so that we can then track the progress? Is that something that would need to be considered in the future?
I'm happy to take that away if the committee would find that helpful, to provide a separate budget line that allowed that funding to be tracked. There is There is within the budget, there is a number of different elements to the active travel budget which are provided for at level 3 from the level 3 sustainable and active travel capital budget, the level 3 sustainable and active travel resources budget, and also the cycling infrastructure budget, and there's local government capital grants which we provide as well. So there are a variety of different funding streams, but I'd be more than happy to take away your suggestion of providing a specific funding stream that wrapped all of these together, if that would assist the committee in its scrutiny and tracking of funding in this area.
Thanks. Just one final question, Convener. I agree with you, Cabinet Secretary, that a lot of the portfolios do cross, so it is obviously valuable that active travel is included in all the other budget parts as well. So I think it's good that you clarified that. So, but I'm happy to continue to look at whether we need to include separate budget lines. So thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Emma. Peter Chapman, you've got the next questions. Peter.
Thanks, Convener. Cabinet Secretary, my questions are on road maintenance. You're aware, I'm sure, that the committee looked in detail at this issue last year, and we made 16 recommendations to address the £1.2 billion backlog on trunk roads maintenance and the £1.8 billion for local roads. Substantial figures, you'll agree. We do see that the trunk road maintenance budget for 2021-2 has been boosted, but have any additional funds been made available to local authorities through local government settlement to increase investment in local roads?
So, as I've said previously, my portfolio is not responsible for the local road network. That's covered through the local government settlement. The 2021-2022 local government settlement provides an increase in day-to-day funding for local authorities revenue services to the tune of £335.6 million, which is a 3.1% increase compared to 2021 settlement. But it is then down to individual local authorities to then decide upon how they wish to allocate any additional funding which they receive, including for the use on maintaining and improving local road networks. So that's a matter which is determined by local councillors.
Well, about how local road maintenance is delivered. So has any progress been made on reviewing local road maintenance delivery structures with a view to achieving best value, or is that not within your remit either?
No, that's not directly within my remit, again, because it's a local government matter, and what we have been doing is looking at the existing regional transport partnerships as part of the National Transport Strategy, which is around planning for transport within a regional area. But any specific issues around looking at partnerships for road maintenance, etc., are not matters that sit within my portfolio, Mr. Chapman. They are matters that would sit within the local government side and would be taken forward by COSLA and others rather than within the Transport Scotland portfolio.
Okay, thank you, Convener. That's me.
Okay, and the next questions come from Stuart Stevenson, who I think is sitting in his car. Stuart, I'm glad to see it's not moving.
No, indeed, Convener. The broadband at home has finally become unusable. However, this works. Let me, since the Cabinet Secretary has just raised the issue of the National Transport Strategy, ask about how the sustainable investment hierarchy has actually been used in setting the transport budget priorities.
Thank you for your question, Mr. Stevenson. I've had a few ministerial meetings from the back of my own car as well over recent months, so I know how it feels. Can I just say, in terms of the sustainable investment hierarchy, if you look at the investment profile that we've set out within our capital spending review and also within our infrastructure investment plan, you will see a move towards a greater focus on maintenance and supporting existing infrastructure in transport and in other areas of the public sector estate. So you're seeing that transition away from building for new projects, just as in a way that it's a case of just replace rather than repair and improve. So you're seeing that transition already taking place. You can see it from the funding that we've set within the low carbon fund, the £2 billion, how there is a £120 million is going into supporting new zero emission buses, the £500 million which we're investing in bus prioritisation, the £500 million that we're investing in active travel. So you are seeing that shift moving much more towards investing in areas that are about supporting and sustaining sustainable forms of transport, and at the same time moving away from continued replacement to much more maintenance and making greater use of existing assets. Not just in my portfolio, but right across the infrastructure investment plan and also in the capital spending commitments that we've made.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. The NTS also makes reference to place-based investment. Now, I realise place-based planning is something that another minister will be responsible for, but since reference is made to that in the NTS, how has that actually influenced things? And would it be possible to give an example that might show us that cross-cutting influence between the planning system and your responsibilities?
So I think it's a good point, because place-based policy is not a policy area that sits in any one portfolio, although it's another minister that leads on it, but it requires a range of actions across government in different portfolios. If I was to give you a practical example in terms of the Scottish Government's support for placemaking, bus prioritisation, which is about reallocating road space for the use of public bus services, is a very good example of the work that we're taking forward to help to support place-based making. Alongside that, you can see it through active travel infrastructure investment, the way in which that can support place-based making as well. Very good examples of that are, for example, the active travel highways are being developed in Glasgow, for example, in Sauchiehall Street, which has completely transformed that whole environment, and for those who live in that area, through the reallocation of road space for active travel purposes. So a combination of a couple of these capital investments, Mr Stevenson, I think demonstrate my portfolio's commitment to supporting place-based making, alongside our commitment to review the rollout of 20-mile-an-hour zones, again can help to support and assist in creating place-based policy making at a local level.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. Thank you, Convener.
Thanks very much, Stuart. The next questions are from the Deputy Convener, Maureen Moore. Maureen.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning, Cabinet Secretary and your team. My questions relate to digital connectivity. In relation to the £98.2 million capital allocation for digital connectivity, can you provide a breakdown between the R100 contracts with BT, the voucher scheme and the Scottish 4G infill programme?
Good morning. So the £90 million that we have, so £90 million of that funding in the capital budget for next year is focused on the delivery of the 3 R100 contracts and also the Scottish Broadband Voucher Scheme. So activity is already underway in each of the 3 contracts, with the first premises through the contracts having been connected last year. So we want to build on that. And we've now also got something like in the region of 50 registered suppliers as part of our voucher scheme as well. The way in which the funding is organised for funding in this area is dependent upon the progress that contractors make. So there will always be an element of change and flexibility in year. So, for example, if greater pace is made in, say, for example, the northern contract than the southern contract, then funding will be allocated between those different contracts to reflect that. So there's an element of the budget is dependent on the progress that contractors make in taking forward the work. But the £90 million of that budget is specifically for the 3 contracts. There's around £4 million of that is also for the Scottish 4G infill programme, and also the 5G, the Scotland 5G Centre, and the remaining element of that is for the voucher scheme. So that's broadly the breakdown of the £98 million.
So we know, for example, that you said you can move money between the 3 R100 contracts. Given that the North was delayed because of court case, is it possible to move money to allow the North to catch up so that it isn't going to fall behind so far because of that court case?
It's not so much providing them with more money to take the programme forward. It's more to do with the pace at which they can move forward with the programme. So the way in which the contract will be shaped is on the basis of what they believe they can deliver in the course of over the course of a year or the several years for the contract. So it's not about the money's paid on the basis of the work that they've carried out. So if the contractor is able to ramp up work in the North, that obviously could create financial pressure for us if it's not what they originally said that they were intending to carry out. But the budget we have allocated just now is able to cover what the contractors are saying to us they expect to be able to complete over the course of this financial year. But it is paid in arrears on the basis of the work that they actually carry out, rather than being up front for delivering something specifically as such.
Right. Okay, I get that. So, are you confident that the funding allocations in budget 21-22 are sufficient to make a difference to those impacted by the digital divide?
I think that's in part yes. So there's an element of this that there's no doubt that the R100 programme will have a significant impact in helping to improve high quality digital connectivity into some of Scotland's most remote parts in a way which will allow people who live in some of the remote communities to have a level of digital connectivity which is as good, if not better, in our major urban areas. It's also a project that will deliver something in the region of 15 subsea connections, again just demonstrating the reach and scale of this project in itself. So it will deliver a significantly improved level of digital connectivity across rural Scotland. However, that's only part of the issue. There remains an issue around access to the use of digital connectivity. So you may have access to broadband connectivity, but if you can't afford to have a computer or to run your broadband, then you could find yourself excluded and experience digital exclusion. So there is funding that we provide through our digital connectivity programme, which is around £45 million, which is about bringing up to 55,000 people who are presently digitally excluded to support them to get online by the end of 2021. So that's targeted very much at individuals who are digitally excluded, not because of a lack of just digital connectivity, broadband connectivity, but being able to afford to be able to have a computer and also to be able to sustain a broadband connection. And that fund is specifically designed to help to support individuals and to assist them and be able to make use of digital capacity.
That sounds very interesting, Cabinet Secretary. Who runs that, and does it include? It's all right having a piece of kit if you don't know how to use it. So does it include through, I don't know, community centres or people able to teach people how to use it as well?
So I think it's through a variety of different initiatives. If I ask Robbie McGee, he might be able to say a bit more about the nature of how that fund operates, but my understanding is that it's provided through a variety of different methods to help to support people in getting on to digital connectivity. But Robbie McGee might be able to give you a bit more detail around how the fund directly operates.
Yeah, no, happy to do that, Cabinet Secretary. It's a programme that was set up very much in response to the particular circumstances that the pandemic has really brought into stark focus. So, Connecting Scotland programme, it's a collaboration with local government and the third sector through SCBO. So it is very much intended to be that end-to-end service. It is about giving people an internet access. It's about giving them, if they need a device, but also crucially, it's that training and support as well. So it's very much a kind of end-to-end service that enables, as the Cabinet Secretary said, some of the kind of most vulnerable and digitally excluded people, across Scotland to be able to access services, support, and obviously connect with people through the pandemic. So it's not a programme that's funded through the connectivity capital budget. It's through the wider Scottish Government budget, but it's one that again plays into the theme of kind of tackling the digital divide, which is obviously a big strand of the current digital strategy for Scotland that will be published soon.
So how would a member of the public find out about it and be able to access something through that?
So we've got, first off, they can access the Connecting Scotland website. There's a number of different organisations that are affiliated to the programme, who they can engage with, local authorities, say third sector organisations that have links out into the community. So the website's probably a good starting point, but obviously there are a range of community-based organisations that are proactively identifying people that can benefit from the scheme. So again, we can provide the committee with more details on the various ways in which people can engage with it, if that would be helpful.
Okay, thank you. And my final question, and obviously the impact of the pandemic has meant that a huge change on work and travel patterns and behaviours, an increase in home working. So what consideration is Transport Scotland now giving to enhance coordination with the digital connectivity policy in the development of future transport policy and budgets?
There is I would say probably in the course of the last year, there's a greater level of coordination taking place within government, between transport and digital, in order to ensure that we are working in a coordinated fashion in the development of our policy thinking. So if I was to say to you a practical example of how that's now materialising, is that Transport Scotland officials are working with colleagues in digital connectivity to develop a piece of work which is a joint project, which is around developing a digital map which will overlay both the digital connectivity infrastructure and our transport infrastructure, and to identify where there are areas within our transport infrastructure that could help to support the delivery of digital connectivity. So are there ways in which we can use, for example, parts of the trunk road network that could be used for providing access for digital connectivity? Are there other transport assets, whether it may be in the rail network, that could be used for the provision of digital connectivity? Looking at using these different transport assets to help to support the rollout of digital connectivity. And that digital map is about is to try and create an integrated system so that they can have an overview of both sets of assets and to then use that for planning it going forward. So I would say now more than ever we are looking at trying to bring these things together where it could help with the delivery of particularly help with delivery of digital connectivity. The other area where it's becoming increasingly important is around the use of digital capability for supporting people in making use of public transport, and how we can make the use of ticketing, etc., much more integrated. And we are working with colleagues in this digital side in government to help to support and assist on how we can go about designing systems that help to enable people to make use of public transport through greater use of digital capabilities. So, as I say, e-ticketing and also mapping for the use of services. So so I would say, if anything, the last year there has been a real step change in trying to bring these areas more closely together and more aligned in their planning and thinking, and some of that work has already started. The very example I gave you is a good example of a project that's now been taken forward between Transport Scotland and digital officials.
So I suppose, in order to encourage people when they do go back to work, however many days a week, to use public transport instead of their cars, we can say that there's the offer of digital connectivity on whatever form of transport they're on. I mean, that would be a good marketing idea for getting people back into public transport.
Exactly. So it's trying to, and the mapping exercise plays an important part in that, because it allows us to try and overlay both the digital infrastructure with the transport infrastructure. So it can assist us in looking at how we can prioritise areas that can be identified as an area where there's a need for further digital connectivity to support, for example, providing digital connectivity on the transport network that may help to assist people and support people in making use of public transport.
Fine,
Okay.
That's great. Thank you.
Thanks, Maureen. A couple of quick questions, follow-ups. Stuart Stevenson, followed by Emma Harper. Stuart.
Thank you, Convener. I just wanted to pick up on the previous reference to the government's voucher scheme, and indeed there is a UK government voucher scheme as well, which I tried to use. I got a quote of over 100,000, so I concluded the voucher wouldn't make very much difference. How many folk have actually applied for the Scottish Government voucher scheme, and what real difference is it actually making? Because I suspect most of the people who might benefit from it in some way are probably in quite expensive to reach locations where the government will only be paying a very small proportion of it. So how is it actually working, Cabinet Secretary?
Yeah,
Cabinet Secretary, just before you go off on that, I'll try and draw you back to the budget and how it relates to the budget. This is a budget session. So, Cabinet Secretary.
Okay, so I think you raise a very important issue, and that is the budget provision that we're making for the Scottish voucher scheme. So, and that's covered within this year's budget. I'm going to ask Robbie McGee to give you a wee bit more detail around the voucher scheme directly itself. My understanding is the uptake on the voucher scheme has been relatively low so far. So there's a bit of work for us to do there to make sure that people are aware of the voucher scheme and how it is operating. But Robbie McGee should be able to give you some further details around exactly the numbers of people who have made use of the voucher scheme so far.
Numbers and cost, Mr. McGee, please. No, you are unfortunately muted. Pause a moment. Hopefully it should happen for you. But if you're pushing it at the same time, you will be breaking it. Off you go, Robbie.
Yeah, so as the Cabinet Secretary said, it's obviously been a fairly slow burn thus far on the Scottish Broadband Voucher Scheme. We've got currently about £600,000 in the current financial year, which is formally approved within the pipeline, but we do expect that to increase quite significantly in the new year, and there's budget provision in the next financial year to reflect that. I mean, in terms of Stuart Stevenson's point, I mean, I think We understand that the premises that are going to be most in need of the connection through the voucher scheme are going to be quite expensive, but again, the UK government voucher scheme was mentioned. We have worked really closely with UK government to make sure that the two schemes can be used together. So that in combination does give a fairly substantial amount of subsidy that's on offer, up to £8,500 per premise in some cases, which again is going to be difficult when it comes to individual premises in isolation. But I think the key to this, as we've known, is about trying to aggregate demand to get schemes that can come forward on a community basis, which is what we've done. We've obviously shared lots of information on with suppliers via our supplier portal to encourage that aggregation. So we expect to see demand for the scheme to continue to pick up in the new financial year, and we'll be looking to do further efforts to publicise it as well.
Okay, Emma Harper.
Thanks, Convener, for allowing me in. It's just a quick follow-up because the Cabinet Secretary described different portfolios that overlap with digital, and I'm sure there are different government systems and programmes that overlap as well. How much money does the UK government contribute to digital infrastructure support in Scotland?
I don't have the figure directly to hand, but I'd be more than happy to write to the committee to set out the detail of that. But you will be well aware that the lack of digital investment from the UK government resulted in the DSSP programme having to be instigated and developed because of the number of rural communities that were being disadvantaged through a lack of investment in digital infrastructure. And the R100 programme is about extending that even further and providing even better digital connectivity. So there has been a lack of investment over an extended period of time that has resulted in the need for these programmes to be taken forward by the Scottish Government. If we had not done so, there is a risk that a number of our rural communities in particular would have been placed at very significant disadvantage through that lack of UK government investment. But I'll come back to you specifically with the scale and nature of the UK government's contribution so far on the digital connectivity programme.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, Cabinet Secretary, just have a question on broadband so I understand it. I think the overall value of the R100 contract was £579 million. You're suggesting there's around a £90 million drawdown against that. That leaves £500 million. When are you predicting the last of the full cost of R100 will be met? What year is the last time you will be paying against R100?
So it's difficult to predict exactly at the present moment because a big part of that is dependent upon the contractors in taking for the delivery of the contracts. I can ask Robbie to say a little more about the potential timescale around some of these, but given that the contractors are working or having to take forward the programme in what are at times geographically very, very challenging environments, it will take some length of time. But I'll ask Robbie to say a wee bit more in terms of the contracts and the timeframes around those. But I would expect it to be completed or be taken forward over the course of the next couple of years at quite a rapid rate once the contractors are able to actually start to make progress. But Robbie can maybe say a bit more in terms of some of the timeframes around the contract specifically.
Robbie, that'd be helpful. Timeframes.
No, indeed. So there's obviously been spend, and there will be spend across all three contracts in the current financial year. That will ramp up as the Cabinet Secretary indicated. It does tend to, these large-scale programmes, they clearly involve a lot of preparatory work, but once the surveys are done and start being done in pace, we can start to see momentum build up at quite an impressive rate. So obviously, as we've said, the budget that's been indicated for next financial year kind of reflects that. It's really ramped up. In Central and South, as has been said before, vast majority build, or we expect that the build will be largely complete by 23-24. The North contract clearly has been subject to some delays. We signed the contract in December. There's lots of survey work that's already underway, work to secure ships that will deliver the subsea cables that the Cabinet Secretary talked about earlier on. Again, within that, there is an element of remodelling and recalibration just around some of the changes to commercial coverage that have happened. So again, we'll get the precise delivery timescales for the North Lot that will fall out over the next couple of months. But again, we hope, and we've obviously, the discussions that we've had with Openreach have been about trying to make sure that we protect the sort of timescale that we had in mind originally, and try and ensure that there's not any further delay as a result of the court challenge that obviously concluded last year.
Okay, so Cabinet Secretary, the contract for the Lot 1 was £384 million, we're told. You must have agreed a timescale when you signed up that sort of expenditure on when it would be delivered. Could you tell me when it will be delivered so we can see when that £384 million will be expended out of the budget?
Well, just for the very reasons that Robin McGee has said, is that there are some elements around the timescale which we can't set out exactly at the present moment for the reasons of the planning work that's been taken forward by Openreach. What I can assure is that what I'd be more than happy to do is to come back to the committee with further details on that once we have been able to get greater clarity from the contractors over the course of the next couple of months. But what you can be assured of is that this is a very ambitious programme that will deliver a level of digital connectivity that will be transformational for many people who live within rural communities, goes way beyond what was originally intended in terms of digital connectivity. So it will make a very significant difference once the full programme has been rolled out.
Okay, Cabinet Secretary, it would be helpful if you could write to the committee with the timescales, because I cannot believe a contract for that size wasn't signed without timescales within it. I'm not seeing any other questions from members. So, Cabinet Secretary, you seem to have got away quite early from this meeting, but I'd like to thank you and your officials for taking part in the session. And I would say to committee members, I would like you back ready to go, please, at 10:15, and therefore I suspend the meeting till 10:15. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good morning again and welcome back. I'm now going to move on to agenda item 6, which is again a draft Scottish Budget financial scrutiny session. I'd like to welcome from the Scottish Government Fergus Ewing, the Cabinet Secretary for the Rural Economy and Tourism, Marie Donnelly, the Head of ARE Finance, Cara Cowan, the Interim Deputy Director for EU Exit and Future Funding, Jessie Laurie, the Head of Enterprise Sponsorship, and James Muldoon, the Head of Agricultural Support Policy Development Unit of the Scottish Government. Cabinet Secretary, would you like to make a 3-minute opening statement, please?
Yes, good morning, everybody, and I thank the committee for this invitation to give evidence to this session. The publication of the 2021-22 Scottish Budget comes almost 1 year on from the first case of COVID-19 being notified in Scotland. This pandemic, it's fair to say, has shaken our society and our economy to their core, with the harsh reality of EU exit taking a further toll. This budget will bring support and stability, ensure our economy recovers, and protect those who have been hit hardest, as well as plan and deliver a strong, fair and green recovery in the longer term. Investment in the rural economy has grown significantly, with the RET's overall spending power increasing by £95 million to £1.12 billion. £630 million in ongoing support will ensure stability across the rural economy and provide cash flow to agriculture, fishing and seafood, supporting both green and blue recoveries. With sector-led groups, we will support farmers and crofters to cut emissions and support long-term changes to make food production more sustainable. Forestry growth is also key in our net zero 2045 target and in supporting our economy. There is a sustained increase, Convener, in forestry funding with an uplift of 49% between 2019 and 2021, and an investment of £150 million over the lifetime of the next Parliament. Both Scottish Forestry and Forestry and Land Scotland will double their youth employment, creating much needed economic and employment opportunities across the country, especially in rural areas. The Scottish Government has allocated £3 billion in business support since the start of the pandemic. In this budget, we target crucial recovery and renewal investment for food and drink, more than double the Rural Tourism Infrastructure Fund, and increase Rural Enterprise Agency's investment by 29% to £103 million to continue their key role in recovery. But we can't escape from the stark reality that progress is more difficult than it need be. Very simply, the UK Government promised that we would be better off by leaving the UK is now proving to be wrong. We have been clear and consistent that we expect full replacement of EU funds. We have sought £62 million a year funding for replacement of EU Maritime and Fisheries Fund, EMFF, but disappointingly received only £14 million. As matters stand, Scotland is losing out on £170.1 million of funding through to 2025 that should be spent on our producers and on our rural communities. This makes our job harder, but it does not mean that we won't succeed. Our recovery may be long and it will be hard, and we can't guarantee that there won't be more tough times ahead. But in conclusion, Convener, this budget seeks to focus on how we continue to protect, recover, rebuild and renew our country. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cabinet Secretary. And I remind you last week how good you were at being succinct with your answers to questions. I think those were your exact words. I will hold you to that today because we have a lot of questions to get through. And I just remind everyone to keep their questions short as well to allow the Cabinet Secretary to fulfil his promise to the committee. And on that basis, the first questions are from Richard Lyle. Richard.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, Cabinet Secretary. Cabinet Secretary, the Scottish Government has cited there is a shortfall of 170 million in rural funding to 2025. Can you explain briefly where the shortfall is seen and what the implications are and why this shortfall has arisen?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Lyle. There are three elements to the shortfall. First, the failure of the UK Government to honour committed SRDP 2014 to 2020 spend, that's 33 million. Second, the failure of the UK Government to commit to the BEW review funding levels after 2021-2022, and that amounts in total to 77.1 million. And thirdly, the imposition of a disputed methodology on all of the devolved administrations that leaves Scotland with an annual budget cut 60 million. In total, this is a cut of 170.1 million over the next 4 years. I'll leave it there, Convener, in order to be concise and brief.
So, thank you for that. So we're being short-changed again. Can you tell me regarding the remaining EU funds from 2014-2020, Pillar 2 programme? The budget table suggests that 24 million for legacy payments under the SRDP is still coming from the EU for 2021-22 financial year. Are these different from the funds that you expect to be available to be spent following the end of the 2014-2020 programme?
Well, this 24 million is noted for legacy programmes under the SRDP is funding from the European Union. As with previous years, Mr. Lyle, this money comes to Scotland via the UK Government. The issue faced by Scotland's rural communities post-Brexit is that the UK Government has chosen not to recognise this sum as part of the distinct and committed 2014 to 2020 Pillar 2 programme. They refused to recognise that it was part of that programme. Instead, they made a conscious choice to count it as an element of the 2021-22 allocation. So the indisputable effect of the UK Government making this choice, and making it, I may say so, unilaterally, is a 24 million cut made by the UK Government to the budget in 21-22, with a further 9 million cut being passed on in 22-23.
So again, we're being short-changed. Convener, that's me. I think Colin Smith has other questions on this subject.
Oh, thank you very much for prompting me, Mr. Lyle. I think I'd noted that myself. Always after my job, I fear. Colin, you have some questions you'd like to ask.
Thank you very much, Convener, and thank you very much to Mr. Lyle for the introduction. Can I just pick up on the point about agricultural payments, Cabinet Secretary? The budget for 21-22 shows a 20% cut in the agri-environment climate scheme from 42.7 million to 34.2 million at a time we face a nature and climate emergency. Can I ask, why have you made a choice to cut that particular budget? We've not seen the long-awaited report yet from the farming and food production, which are policy groups. So surely it's premature to make such a savage cut and change to CAP when we still have no idea what your plans are for agricultural support at the end of the transition period.
Well, I don't really agree with the characterisation of the question. We have a renewed in the new round AICS expenditure. We have carried forward spend from the previous programme. We have worked with Nature Scott in order to deliver key components of the AICS scheme. And if you look at the spending overall, Mr. Smith, i.e. overall spending in Pillar 1 and Pillar 2, you'll see around about, if you take account, for example, the greening payments and the forestry payments and other payments, around about 1/3 of the total expenditure can be attributable to environmental schemes. So it's wrong to think in silos here, as the question implies. I think we are doing more. But of course, given that the UK is cutting unilaterally the devolved budgets of the administrations by £170 million, there will be less money, obviously, to be spent on the environment. And, just as your daughter, Mr. Smith, I'm sure will want Scotland to lead the way in the environment, I think that's what my daughter wants as well. And I do hope that, we can have a cross-party campaign, as we did in Convergence, to persuade the UK government to restore this £170 million cut, precisely so that we can do all that we want to do for the environment.
Cabinet Secretary, you have made the point that the basic payments, green payments and other CAP pillar payments totaling, I think, somewhere in the region of 485 million over the next few years are going to happen. I'm just particularly keen to know why you have made a very specific decision, which I think has wrongly been condemned by farming and environment groups, to cut the agri-environment climate scheme specifically by 20%. It is quite a substantial change.
Well, I do think that the announcement of the new AICS scheme has been welcomed by and large. I think it's the case that NGOs will always want us to do more, and we are doing more. And I would point to the fact that the farmer-led groups are involved in delivering my vision, which I hope other parties will support, of a government in Scotland that produces high-quality food as a prime objective to feed the nation, to provide food security, which should not be taken for granted, but also to do so in accordance with the high environmental standards. And increasingly there will be conditionality across the board. So that vision I have is one that, I would have thought that you would warmly welcome, and I very much hope that you do. Convener, I don't know if there are any other technical issues that I haven't covered, in which case maybe Cherie Donnelly might want to add anything that I've, in my concise answer, not mentioned.
Well, before we bring her in, I'd like to bring in Jamie Halcrow-Johnson, and then if there's something that needs sweeping up in the end, we'll bring in Cherie. So, Jamie.
Thanks very much, Convener. Good morning, Cabinet Secretary. I'm disappointed with what was, I think, a very politically motivated response that you gave to Mr. Lyle's probably politically motivated questions. The simple fact is the United Kingdom government has maintained funding levels, yet cuts have been made, as Colin Smith mentions, to the agri-environment schemes, to LEADER, which we'll come on to, I think, a little bit later. This is surely about priorities, and the priorities that you make as Cabinet Secretary for Rural Economy, and you've chosen to make. And let's say these are your choices to make. If your argument is that there isn't enough money within the budget, and given the record levels of funding that the Scottish Government has received this year already, I'm looking forward to next year, are you confident, are you comfortable that you've made the case with your colleagues within, say, such as the Finance Secretary, for adequate funding for the rural economy within Scotland?
Well, of course I've made the case, and we have received a very satisfactory settlement with a substantial uplift. And that's because of the fact that we've had constructive engagement, and Kate Forbes and her team have listened very carefully. And I'm surprised that the question and the tone of the question, I answered Mr. Lyon's question.
You're making cuts still, and so it can't be adequate if you're being forced to make cuts that you would prefer not to. Again, it's about priority, surely.
Well, no. The simple fact of the matter is that Scotland's farmers and rural communities stand to lose 170 million over the period from this year to 24-25 as a direct result of the UK government's reneging on public commitments that farmers and crofters would not be worse off and that the EU funding would be matched. Could I just finish my answer, please? Could I just finish my answer and not be interrupted?
Whoa, everyone. Sorry. It's really difficult if we all carry out the committee meeting like we would do it in one room. We can't do that. And I will let you back in, Jamie, but you must get the Cabinet Secretary an opportunity to answer the question. The Cabinet Secretary, briefly, please, and I'd like to then bring in Jamie.
I just want to finish the question with one factual point, that this reduction of £170 million made unilaterally and not notified to ministers, but notified first of all to civil servants. It is not an issue that is only of huge concern in Scotland, convener. It is an issue where the concerns are shared by administrations in Wales and in Northern Ireland. And therefore, I think to characterise it as a political issue is wrong. And I very much hope that just as Parliament United in the convergence campaign which I led and which we won, that all parties will recognise that there is merit in this campaign. And the last thing I would say is that although the Conservatives have said this is rubbish, in fact, Mr Eustace has admitted in writing to me that in respect of the BEW component of 77 million, that he's keen to engage to resolve this, and that the reason why he didn't was that the UK, unlike the EU, budget on a year-to-year basis. So I think the facts speak for themselves. This is not political. This is very serious indeed. And obviously a reduction of this scale can be a means that we are not able to succeed to the extent that we would wish. Thank you.
Jamie.
And thanks very much, convener. Apologies if I jumped in there. I was trying to establish, but as my point was that there will be disagreement on this level of funding, and obviously the Cabinet Secretary has his views on that, and others have other views. But my point was about this is about priorities, and some of these schemes that are being cut back because the Scottish Government have made the choice to cut them back and to look at other schemes or other funding. And that is a political choice, or that is a policy choice of the Scottish Government, unrelated to the funding here. And had it been simply a funding issue, I think we could recognise that. But the investment has gone into other areas. So as I say, it is a political choice, a political priorities of this government to cut back on areas like agri-environment schemes and LEADER.
And your question, that was a statement,
well, it may have been
Jamie.
We don't
answer briefly. You may answer briefly as long as it's not a statement in return. If you can try and address a point in there, Cabinet Secretary, I'd be grateful.
Okay, well, there hasn't actually been any assertion as to what precisely the effect of the alleged cuts which the questioner has asked. So I'm not quite sure what in substance is being referred to, but I just wanted to make the point that the further round of AICs will support delivery of a very wide range of environmental measures, with a focus on protected areas, organics, management of supporting farmland waders, corn buntings and corn crakes, slurry stores, and improving access. And indeed, the funding will not substantially change from the 1 million hectares managed in 2020. And finally, convener, in addition to that, of course, we have already had a successful round of the Agricultural Transformation Programme, where around about £18 million has been committed to enhance and improve environmental work by farmers, crofters and land managers. So that is an addition to the good work that's done under the AIC scheme. Thank you.
Right, so concentrating now, if we may, on the budget, I'm going to move to the next lot of questions, which are from Stuart Stevenson. Stuart.
Thank you, Convener. And I want to open up a wee bit of a discussion initially about the European Marine and Fisheries Fund that was and its replacement. We heard that we're getting less than a quarter of the amount of money that we might have expected under the old regime. And with Scotland having the longest coastline in Europe of any country and 60% of the waters in the UK, what sort of constraints will there be in what we can actually do with the paltry 14 million that you referred to earlier, Cabinet Secretary, compared to the actual need, which is substantially greater?
Well, there will be substantial constraints. EMFF has been a good friend to the fishing communities of Scotland. I know that the CFP is not popular, but actually the EMFF as part of the CFP has been popular and appreciated. For example, in Peterhead Harbour improvements, it played a substantial part. In Scrabster, in many other ports that I could mention, in promoting improving facilities for, say, ice equipment, for processors, for the fishing a fleet as a whole. So it has been invaluable. And we calculated, Convener, and I did check the figures myself, actually, the amount that we were asked actually by the UK government to say, how much do you think we should get as a fair allocation? So we came up with around about, from memory, 64, 65 million. I don't have the bit of paper in here, officials will correct me if I'm wrong, but that was the figure that we came up with, based on what we would have got had we remained in Europe. Instead of that, of 64, 65 million, we got 14 million. Now, I know the UK government has talked about a fund of 100 million, but thus far, that's all we know about this. So, I'm hoping that soon we will hear, but the restraints, the constraints rather, will be massive, and they will prevent us from investing in infrastructure projects, for example, in any significant way, and doing all the other things the EMF has done over the years.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. And certainly at Peterhead, new pier space, at Fraserburgh, we have substantial investment, and at Macduff investment. I think the only of one of my major harbours, and I may even be wrong on this, that hasn't received anything was Buckie, but different situation. Let me move on to Blue Economy Action Plan, and just to ask if you can give us some insight as to where that will fund things and what sort of activities we might reasonably expect, because I think at the moment we don't know a great deal about the effects of this.
Well, the blue economy is a concept that really encapsulates really all the activity, covering, for example, marine renewables. And, I've noted the further success that Simec Maygen have had just recently in Japan, but also in the Pentland Firth and the offshore wind. So there's renewables, there's the fisheries sector, and our fisheries management plan envisages an increasingly sustainable fisheries in Scotland. Then of course, there's the work that is done by our ports across the coastline and the islands. And for example, one specific example I can give the committee is the launch of the Stornoway Deepwater Terminal in December last year, with 200 jobs expected to be created in the Outer Hebrides and diverse industries expected to benefit from this £49 million project, with which I was quite closely involved over the last years. In addition to that, I think it's fair to say that we've seen massive investments in the aquaculture sector in things like hatcheries, which mean that the fish spend less time in cages, and that itself is more sustainable. And there's other very substantial investment planned in that sector. And the marine tourism is increasingly an area where Scotland was kind of leading the way with a niche sector, and that encompasses many aspects. And I don't think I'll go into that, Convener, but I was asked to give a...
Yeah, but I think, sorry, Cabinet Secretary, what I'm trying to get you to focus on, if I may, is the investment by the Scottish Government relating to the budget, not investment by the industry as a whole, because a lot of those items that you've suggested there would be investment from industry. Sorry, Stuart, if we can keep focused, it would be helpful.
Convener and Cabinet Secretary, thank you. That's me.
Sorry, Cabinet Secretary, just before we move on, can you just confirm to me so I understand the figures that you quoted there, the 14 million and the 70 million, are the two figures you quoted, those are both annual figures, are they? You said you needed 70 million every year and you're only getting 14 million every year. Well, is that right?
I don't think I said 70, I think I said 64, 65 from memory. And maybe my officials could just correct me if I'm wrong, but that's the amount of 64, 65 million is the annual amount that we believe that we would have received had we remained in the EU. And I can share, and I will share actually, Convener, the computation of that amount, since you ask about figures, with the committee, so that you can see how it's calculated. The 14 million is the amount that we've been allocated by the EU, by the UK, now that we've been dragged out of the EU by the UK, they've allocated 14. So they asked us, what should we get? And we said, well, 64, 65 is fair. Instead of that, it's going to be 14 million. I mean, by any stretch of the imagination, that's a complete disaster and frankly, completely ridiculous. But you know, we do await, as I did say, Convener, to be fair to the UK government, they've said there's this extra money investing in fishing is coming along, but we haven't had any details of that so far as I'm aware already. Now, I really don't want to be inaccurate, so I just ask my officials to come in if I say anything that's wrong, but I don't think that that's wrong.
Okay, and Cabinet Secretary, what I'm trying to do is find out if both figures are the same, they're annual. I didn't need the rest of that. Peter, do you want to come in, please, with a question on this? You indicated you might.
I do, Convener. I mean, Cabinet Secretary, the committee has held evidence in February that there are continued challenges with exporting to the EU. Has there been any contingency planning by the Scottish Government in the event that the sector requires an ongoing financial support to help in the export of fish? For example, with certification costs, is there anything that you can do as a Scottish Government to help with some of these costs?
Well, I mean, Mr. Chapman is quite right that Brexit has added huge costs to fishing that we never had before, because the imposition of environmental health certificates, and we estimated 2 years ago at least, that 150,000 to 200,000 certificates would be required. These only happen because of Brexit, and I have argued with the UK government, Mr. Gove, that these costs, because they derive directly from Brexit, must be met by the UK. I mean, why on earth does Mr. Chapman think that the Scottish government should meet costs that result from Brexit, which was a decision taken by the UK following the referendum, where Scotland clearly voted the other way? I don't understand why Mr. Chapman feels that is anything other than an absurd proposition.
Peter, do you want to come back in?
Well, I mean, it's absolutely isn't an absurd proposition. We voted to come out of the EU as a united kingdom, and Scotland is part of that UK and still is, and I hope it will be for a long time to come. And therefore, there is a responsibility on all the partners within the UK to help to meet some of these costs. And you know, we recognise that much of the fishing activity takes place in Scotland. There is a responsibility in the Scottish Government to help that fishing industry to export to the rest of the EU, and I remain convinced of that. And given the huge sums that the Scottish Government has received from Westminster, I would have thought there would be some room for help with these costs, and that was the premise of my question.
Well, that was a statement. Hold on, that was a statement, not a question. So, do you have a question then, Mr. Chapman, to ask the Cabinet Secretary?
Well, it's the same question. Is there any plans by the Scottish Government to help with some of these costs?
Well, we've already launched, and we are now administering payment of the £7 million fund to the fisheries sector, to the smaller vessels in the fisheries sector to the fisheries missions that play such an important part for welfare of those who are suffering severe hardship. And the hardship is directly occasioned from the fact of Brexit is now making exports, particularly involving groupage consignments, difficult or impossible. But we have stepped in, Convener, since I'm asked about finance, and although we think it's the UK's responsibility, nonetheless, because fishermen are in hardship at the moment as a result of Brexit and the loss of the EU markets primarily, we have stepped in with a fund of £7 million. The second thing I would say is that Mr. Gove announced that there would be a £20 million fund to deal with the costs of importing and exporting to support seafood businesses. Now, I asked at XO Committee on behalf of the Scottish Government around a fortnight ago, and also at the Seafood Task Force last Friday, will this money be used to defray these additional costs? That's what it seems to be for. So far, answer, there has come none. And it's essential this £20 million fund set up by the UK government is used right now to defray these costs. Because the processing sector, companies there, I know from Jimmy Buchan, who wrote to me about this yesterday, are suffering and suffering big time because of Brexit. The UK says there's money available, but so far none of it has got anywhere.
Right, okay, so we're going to move on to the next lot of questions, which are from Emma Harper. Emma.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, Cabinet Secretary. I'm interested in issues around Highlands Island, the South Scotland Enterprise Agency. We know that they have received funding increases, and both agencies have played a large role in the pandemic response. The Scottish Government will provide £103.3 million of funding for both agencies, which is an increase of £17 million on 2021. So the enterprise agencies have got additional funding, which is great. And how can we ensure that that's been spending then, that's going to be spent on green jobs and creating green jobs over the next financial year, using this additional funding for both agencies? I'm really keen to hear, because I know the South Scotland Enterprise Agency hit the ground running on April the 1st during the pandemic and has done a phenomenal job supporting businesses across the south of Scotland. But it will be good to hear about how the financial support will support the green recovery for both agencies.
Yes, I think that the settlement has been a good settlement for both South of Scotland and HIE, and I'm in regular contact with both organisations. The investment is a combined £103 million in our rural enterprise agencies, an uplift, Convener, in funding of over 20%. And, you know, this is necessary because COVID and I think Brexit, I'm afraid to say, have taken a huge toll on rural businesses, with unemployment rates rising faster in many rural areas for Scotland as a whole. So we are committed to addressing and mitigating these impacts. And the additional funding will underpin the work to improve business and community resilience and help create new good and green jobs. And I know that both bodies are working extremely hard to tackle the economic recovery in general, just as they have been, Ms. Harper, in respect of helping businesses through COVID and administering, for example, the Pivotal Enterprise Fund they did last year. Thank you.
Terry, we know that both Highlands and Islands Enterprise and SOCI are using language which focuses on resilience and recovery and supporting communities. So I'm wondering what support the rural businesses and the agencies will continue to do, what support will they continue to do through lockdown, and what is the role of the agencies post-COVID recovery? How will that be funded?
Well, as I say, the budget has been welcomed. I think I've got quotes here, but I won't read them out. But the chief executives and chairs of both bodies, as I understand, have warmly welcomed the budget. We work collaboratively with them. We had, for example, the South of Scotland Convention, I think a week ago last Monday, and we're due to have the Highlands and Islands Convention again soon. And this helps the enterprise companies, ourselves, the local authorities and other public bodies work together for the green recovery. So it's true to say that, in all the staples of the rural economy, in farming and forestry and peatland restoration, where of course we're committing a £250 million over 10 years, but also in areas like in pump storage, in a fabrication work to support renewables, and in many other ways. I think that rural Scotland will be the engine room of tackling climate change, because only in rural Scotland do we have the landmass asset to be used for all the main ways of storing carbon. So if you like, in some ways, the economic opportunities arising from tackling climate change, which we have to do, are things which are either solely or primarily done in rural Scotland. And that's why I think the budget deployment of so much money, additional money, for the enterprise agencies, plus forestry and woodlands and peatland restoration, is really well focused on the green recovery.
Thank you. Just a final question from me then. Health and well-being is a huge part of the recovery from the pandemic, and South Scotland Agency is, or the enterprise, is a relatively new agency, and HIE has been on the go a lot longer. Will both agencies have to change the way that they plan for their budgets, because we're now focusing more on well-being and recovery because of the pandemic?
Well, yes, I think in general that's a fair comment, and one of which the enterprise agencies are very much aware. In other words, we want to pursue health and well-being as well as sustainable economic growth, and that means, of course, that the enterprise agencies subscribe to the fair wage economy ideals, the living wage, and treating people fairly and with respect. So I think the answer to that is yes.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Emma. Just before we leave enterprise agencies, Cabinet Secretary, the HIE's budget, have you allowed in there any cost for the repair to the funicular railway?
We have done that. I'm just looking for the details, convener, in this copious briefing that I've got. We certainly have worked through this with HIE very carefully to deliver the budget that's required. And yes, here we are. An additional 4.7 million has been allocated for the reinstatement of the funicular and investment in green jobs. So the additional 4.7 million comprises 3.9 million for reinstatement of the funicular and 0.8 million for investment in green jobs through the Green Jobs Fund.
Okay, so thank you for that, Cabinet Secretary. So on that basis, there'll be a requirement to find somewhere in excess of 10 million the following year for the funicular railway, because the overall repair costs are estimated between 15 and 20 million. Would that be made available earlier if the funicular railway was completed, the repairs were completed earlier, Cabinet Secretary?
Well, we have worked with HIE in order to ensure the sufficiency of the budget to deliver the funicular railway as quickly as possible. And of course, we all want to see that work is done as quickly as possible. And I'm very pleased that the appointed contractors, Balfour Beatty, actually began the work very promptly indeed. But I don't believe there's any budgetary issue. What I will do is, because of the importance of this issue, is write to you, convener, with the full details of the budgetary arrangement so that the committee has that before it.
I think that would be helpful, because I mean, technically, if there's 3.9 million pounds in the budget, if you look at the expenditure in 2019-20 for HIE was 61 million, then dropped in 2021 to 58 million, and has risen by 20 in this budget year to 67. So actually, a good proportion, over 50% of that increase in budget is being spent on the funicular railway, whereas the South of Scotland Enterprise budget doesn't have that increase. So I'm concerned that the HIE budget is not quite as rosy as you paint it, Cabinet Secretary.
Well, let me provide the committee with the full answers. I mean, it is quite a complicated issue. There's many aspects to it, and I prefer just to give a copperplate answer, since, as you say, this session is largely about figures.
Indeed. So I look forward to receiving the figures on the expenditure of HIE, and therefore we'll move on to the next questions, which will come from John Finney. John.
Thank you very much indeed, Convener. Good morning, Cabinet Secretary and your officials.
Morning.
Cabinet Secretary, you may recall that the committee wrote to the Scottish Government recommending, and I'll quote here, the Scottish Government provide financial support for rural businesses that have taken the initiative during the COVID-19 pandemic to sell their produce or fish directly to local customers, or that may be interested in doing so. The recovery plan is clear that it aims to support Scottish food production, but perhaps less so about how it will support the local food economies that emerged support communities during the pandemic. Now, I warmly welcome the increased budget to deliver food and drink sector recovery plan. I wonder, can you clarify, please, how this funding will support rural communities as well as the industry by developing local food economies that have supported those communities during the pandemic?
Well, there is. I think Mr. Finney is correct, an interest in local food, and obviously government is involved in many aspects to promote this. For example, the Food for Life programme in primary schools and the work done for local procurement of food, which has been a success in, for example, the Highland Council. I remember visiting Crown Primary, where I heard about examples of local food supply being provided for school meals. I think that's an excellent example of good working by the local authority and the people in the schools, as well as businesses, all working in partnership. I think Mr. Finney's question rightly focuses on, can we help the likes of shellfish fishermen, whether they be in Tarbert or the Western Isles, or indeed in the other parts, to sell directly to market. And if we can do that, and I do think that's something that some may be interested in, and I do think that there is the desire amongst the public for more direct purchasing, and also it is evident that the internet is increasingly used for purchase. I think the difficulty we have at the moment, particularly with the fisheries sector, is that such has been the devastation caused by the loss of markets, substantially through Brexit, but also through other areas like, as Mr. Finney will know, the loss of the brown crab market in China, or the suspension of that, the loss of the live valve mollusk market as exports to Europe, which effectively is banned at the moment. That frankly, we're having to deal with this crisis alleviation at the moment, but I do think that we want to work with the sector, and I think with the inshore fisheries groups, whose representatives we've got very close working relationships, to see how we can further promote this work as we recover, I hope, from the pandemic, and find a modus operandi to deal with the devastation of Brexit. I mean, I'm conscious I've focused largely on fish, but I do know that there has been examples of good entrepreneurship, in the butcher sector, in bakers, in farm shops, and I do want the enterprise network increasingly to look at options to support this, and therefore I do think it's an area where we need to do more working with businesses to see how we can help them sell directly to the public. Cut out the supply chain, and thereby get more of the share of the ultimate price paid by the consumer for themselves. And I think that's something that we've been working on for years, but post-COVID, I think Mr. Finney is exactly right. It's an area that I would like to see us do far more, but primarily, of course, led by the businesses and their initiative themselves.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for that, Cabinet Secretary. I'll leave it there. Thank you, Convener.
Thanks very much, John. The next questions come from Jamie Halcrow-Johnson. Jamie.
Thanks very much. It's actually an area we touched on a little earlier, which is on leader funding. Obviously, the Cabinet Secretary has talked about the budgets that he's operating under. But can I just say, in relation to, or can I ask, kind of in relation to the budget situation we find in, can he confirm that the Scottish Government do have the choice to prioritise and continue leader and the funding for leader, but has chosen to prioritise other rural funding streams instead?
Well, no, I don't think that that's the case. The funding has not reduced. The profile of leader expenditure varies from year to year, and it always has done. And you know, any involvement with leader would lead you inexorably to that conclusion. So it may look like a reduction, but this is not the case. In fact, we provided the budget needed in 2021-22 to enable projects that were delayed or disrupted due to the pandemic to be completed. So leader is continuing to complete live projects. In addition to that, we're working to develop tests of change around community-led local development that create the enabling environment we need to support inclusive growth across rural Scotland. And we've allocated funding of £3 million to enable this development. And we've started discussions with existing leader interests, including local action group chairs and officials in the Rural Economy and Communities Division. Will work with the Rural Parliament and the Rural Network to develop proposals over these next 2 months. But we are pressing the UK for further information in relation to post-Brexit, the future of leader. And you know, this still remains an area of great uncertainty.
So sorry, just to clarify, you're suggesting that the leader funding won't reduce and that the same consistent levels of leader funding will be available for next year?
Well, you know, as far as the future goes, Mr. Halcrow-Johnson, you know, I have to say that leader was a European programme, which now that we're after Brexit, the UK government indicated that it was planning something else and different, namely a UK shared prosperity fund, but we still have a lack of clarity about that. So really, the question is better directed towards the UK as to what its plans are, because this fund, this UK shared prosperity fund, was the phrase was coined about 2 years ago, but there doesn't seem to be much beyond the phrase making. Leader has been an excellent fund for rural communities. We work closely with the leaders of the local action group chairs. I think it should continue, but until we have clarity from the UK and until we recover the 170 million that we need to do everything that we can, it's not possible for me to issue copper plate guarantees about what will happen in the future for these two reasons: the lack of clarity from the UK government about the replacement of leader, the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, and the substantial swinging reductions to the Scottish budget by the UK government.
Okay, well, something you could clarify. Could you clarify what leader funding was in 2021 and what it will be in to the end of 2021?
Well, you know, I can give you all the figures. They're there in the budget figures. I can ask my officials to do it now, or I can write to you in detail to demonstrate that we are not reducing the funding. I don't want to predate the time, Convener, as you've asked me earlier, so I can bring in the officials now, or we can write to you. It's your choice.
Well, I think it'd be quite clear. I mean, if you're suggesting it hasn't, it'd be good to get a clarification from the officials whether or not it has reduced or not.
Who would you like to bring in, Cabinet Secretary?
Cherie Donnelly.
Cherie.
Yes.
Can't hear, Convener.
No, I can't hear either. You're very difficult to hear. So try again, Cherie. Let's see how we go.
Can you hear me now?
Ish. Try.
Right. Okay. Yes. The funding for leader in
No.
No, I can't hear that at all, and I don't think other members are hearing that. Is there another Cabinet Secretary? Is there another official who might be able to answer that question, or is it just Cherie?
Well, I think there are officials here from different parts. I don't think offhand that I can ask other officials to do it. I have actually now just got the full briefing in front of me here, so I can read therefrom if you wish, convener, or I can write to the committee, because I do accept your admonition to be concise, but it's your choice. I can go over it now if you wish.
Well, you can be concise by not reading the whole briefing. You could just give the figures, Cabinet Secretary.
Well, all right. Well, the leader budget for 2021-22 is 10.4 million. There will be sufficient to cover expenditure during the period of programme extension, which goes to 31st December, and this will provide remaining levels of funding in order to complete existing projects, which are expected to slip beyond March 2021, as of course always happens at the end of a 7-year programme. It will be enough to utilise the unallocated budget to meet small adjustments to existing projects to assist with COVID recovery. Some projects have had additional costs because of that, and it will look to meet costs for development work on the current programme to support effective closure and development works to support the future replacement of Leader Community-Led Development, CLLAD. I mean, I've also got a lot more information here.
No, Secretary, you don't need to read it all. It was the figure I think we were after. Does that answer your question, Jamie?
I think I'll leave it for now, convener. Thank you.
Okay, do you have any other questions you want to ask, or is that sufficient for you? I'm not sure if Angus MacDonald wants to come in, but James Muldoon wants to come in. Happy to bring him in. James, if you want to come in.
Yes, I was merely offering to come on the budget piece there, just to confirm the figures, if that is still required.
If you can just give the figures for each year, that would be helpful.
Yeah, so 21-22 is 10.4 million, and last year's was 22 million. But just to offer the context of that, it's important to understand the multi-annual nature of this and how the profile of Leader will go up and down, but effectively works as a bell curve as spend accelerates and diminishes on it. So that just confirms what the Cabinet Secretary was saying regarding the projects this year receiving the funding that was required to continue and indeed build on those COVID delays.
Okay, that's clear. The change in figures, that clarifies it. So I think we'll move on to the next question. Angus, you've indicated you don't want to come in anymore, so I will go to Peter Chapman. Peter.
Yeah, thanks, convener. The climate change, Cabinet Secretary, the climate change policy update document commits to scaling up the Agricultural Transformational Fund. However, the funding committed this year remains at 40 million. And but even more worrying than that, last year the 40 million wasn't even all spent. So I just wonder how will you be able to give us some clarity on this fund going forward? And how it's likely going to be used to address climate change issues.
Yes, well, I was delighted that the round of the Agricultural Transformation Programme has been a success with £18 million of funding, the subject of offers. I would expect that the actual funding awarded might be slightly less than that. There's usually a bit of slippage, maybe about 16-17 million. So that's a very good start for a very successful green plan. To answer Mr. Chapman's question, yes, we do anticipate using the Agricultural Transformation Fund further. We are examining a number of avenues for utilising financial transactions because 20 million of the programme is FTs. This type of funding is more challenging to use because we've got to be careful not to crowd out private sector backed lending, and we need to make sure that such lending was done in a way that's consistent with subsidy controls and UK international trading commitments. So the majority of the capital funding allocation has now been assigned to the Sustainable Agricultural Capital Grant Scheme, and for additional Scottish forestry projects. So there's yet more to be done, and I expect, finally, and just to add to the answer, Mr. Chapman, we obviously have 5 farmer-led groups to assist us in the shorter term with steps that we can take to help farmers and crofters continue to build on their reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. So I'm aiming to utilise this fund to assist in that process once we get recommendations from the groups, from the farmer-led groups, farmer and crofter-led groups, and informed by the evaluation of the pilot grant scheme that we ran last year. So many of these groups will make recommendations which I suspect will lead to a need for funding from this area, and rightly so.
So, given your expectation, does that mean that you will be able to find extra funds if need be to this fund? I mean, the recommendation that it would require more funding than the 40 million. So, is there some contingency to allow that to happen if these various groups come forward with good suggestions?
Well, I do think we do need to scale up. Yes, I've said that, but that doesn't necessarily mean new funding. It may be through repurposing other funding or indeed other actions. And the climate plan update indeed provides a pathway to transform farming and food productions in Scotland and optimise land use. So I think we will see, as I've said before, increasing focus on environmental spend, utilising the whole range of funding at our disposal.
Thanks, Convener. That's me on that subject. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Colin Smith, I think you've got some questions. Colin.
Thank you very much, Convener. Cabinet Secretary, can I just follow up on Peter Chapman's point? You just said that possibly less than £18 million of the 40 million fund for this year is likely to have been spent. So can you clarify, is the 2021-22 budget all new money, or is the unallocated funds from this year part of the 40 million for next year?
Well, first of all, when I said less than 18 million, we have committed, just to be accurate, as I understand it, we've committed around about 18 million in respect of the funding round just completed. The point I was making is that for various practical reasons, not every scheme goes ahead, and therefore I would expect that the total spend will be slightly less than that. That's really a technical, practical point, and I would expect that that could be around 16 or 17 million, and that's entirely normal. I do think we need to do more of this, and what I'm saying is that we can either use agricultural transformation programme funding, or we can use other sources of funding. The difficulty that we have in respect of utilisation of the whole of 40 million was, as I've described, that 20 million of that was in respect of financial transactions. And financial transactions are extremely useful for some types of funding, but are more difficult to use for other types of funding. And that's just a reality of FTs. I mean, for example, FTs are used for payment, have been used for payment of the loan schemes to enable effectively advance payments for Pillar 1 payments to farmers to be made in September. And I've recently made it clear that this year farmers will receive the same a right to a loan, effectively advance payment, in most cases, in September. So FTs are useful for some things, but they're more challenging to use for other things. But we are examining a number of ways in which we can use the FT budget. So I did, to be in fairness, cover, I think, most of the ground earlier, Convener, but I do appreciate that these are technical areas. So again, I'm happy, rather than take up more time now, unless you wish me to pass to officials for a more technical answer, to provide the technical detail in a letter for the committee very quickly.
Cabinet Secretary, I'm just trying to be very clear about the budget says for this forthcoming year that the fund is 40 million. It was 40 million for last year. You've just said, obviously, only about 18 or possibly less of that from the 40 million in the current financial year has actually been spent. So I'm just trying to get an answer to the quite a simple question. Is the 40 million for the forthcoming year new money, or does that include anything that's underspent from this year? And you've touched on the problem with the fact that 20 million appears to be financial transactions, and you've said it's difficult to spend that. So that difficulty will arise this year. But I'm just trying to work out, is the 40 million for this year all new money, or does it contain funds that weren't spent in the current financial year?
Well, the budget for 2022 is 20 million capital and 20 million financial transactions have been allocated to assist in delivering these objectives. So that is the budget for this year. I think that's fairly clear, convener. But again, if it's helpful, then we can send more details. Or if you wish, I could bring in Mr. Muldoon or Ms. Donnelly if they want to add anything now.
So I'm just trying to work out whether or not the 40 million for this year includes money that hasn't been spent in the existing year. I think it's quite a straightforward question. Presumably, none of the 20 million for financial transactions has been allocated at all in the current year. Is that correct? And that's what's being carried over to next year.
No, in the current year we used the 18 million in respect of grants and not of financial transactions. I mean, if in regards to the carry forward question, I don't know if Mr. Muldoon can help us out on this, since yes, he can.
Yes, come on, James, in you come.
No problem. So the understanding that I've got on it, to be clear on this, is that the 21-22 budget is not carried over due to limitations on the Scotland Reserve, which naturally has to be managed across the whole Scottish Government budget. So the clear line I have on this is that it's funded from 21-22 budget entirely.
So just on that point, it's all new money, but it's all new money, but what you're saying is that the existing £40 million has not been spent. In fact, it sounds like less than 18 million has been spent, so that money has just disappeared into the Scottish Government Reserve.
It hasn't been carried over because of the limitations on the amount that can be carried over in the Scotland Reserve. So all I can offer is that it is new money for this coming financial year.
So just to be clear, what happened to the underspend in the current year? The 40 million in the current budget hasn't been fully spent. So what's happened to that money that hasn't been fully spent?
Bear with me a second. I'm just trying to see if I have that. All I can say, it's managed across the Scottish Government out with this portfolio alone.
Quite good to get a follow-up as to where that money went.
I'm sure the Cabinet Secretary, having offered to do follow-ups on previous one, will do the follow-up on that one as well, where that 40 million went.
Happy to. I think I've already covered the FT issue, but we'll write with the full detail if you wish. Thank you.
Okay. Colin.
I think that was my final question there, convener. Thanks.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Colin. We'll move on to Stuart Stevenson. Stuart.
Thank you, convener. Cabinet Secretary, I want to just probe a little bit on how we make the transition for land managers to greater use of low carbon practices, and in particular how the government can realign and enhance advisory and knowledge transfer programs to make sure we do that. We don't see in the financial numbers how that's going to work. So how's the budget going to support that transition in advisory services?
Well, we do envisage that support will need to be underpinned by a kind of modern agricultural knowledge and innovation system to encourage uptake of existing best practice, as well as new and innovative farming methods. So fostering and sharing of knowledge with modernisation and digitisation of the sector will be important. So we will require to bring forward new methods of support of scientific and economic expertise to guide farmers and crofters through the new requirements to farm sustainably. And obviously this will require the design or the shaping of reshaping of advisory schemes to assist. I mean, broadly speaking, the SRUC has successfully succeeded in winning a contract from the Scottish Government, which I think from memory, Convener, was from £20 million over a period of 4 or 5 years, and that they have provided excellent advice, well respected by farming communities. So we're not starting from a standing start, because a lot of work has already been done. And in particular, the arable sector has already, I think, been using digitized methods of improving productivity and efficiency for years, as you will know. So we're not starting from a standing start, but there will be a need for funding requirements for advice. I'm confident that we will be able to deliver that advice over the budget, and we will have to devise those schemes once we get the reports from the farmer-led groups. And I've tasked the farmer-led groups to provide us with advice as soon as possible in the short term, and therefore I would expect that we can make very rapid progress after that, after the election, or at least the incoming administration will be able to do that fairly swiftly after the election is over. But in the meantime, advice is available to all farmers and crofters up to a certain value, and that's an offer which has been taken up and utilised very well over the years, I believe, and that will need to be reshaped to provide the necessary scientific, economic and agronomy advice for sustainable farming in the future.
Just to close that one off, obviously you've talked about a 4-year contract with SRUC, and clearly quite a lot of this is not a single year issue. But in particular, you've just made reference to getting advice from farmers, which will be recycled to other farmers and land managers more generally. So in a sense, that creates huge value. But is it the case that it comes at virtually no additional cost, that sharing and the existing provisions that you've got in place cover the costs for the government in doing that, but the real value is actually delivered by the farmers themselves to their colleagues in the profession?
I think that's a very fair point, and I would say that the recommendation, the report rather, that was produced by Jim Walker and Claire Simonetta late last October, early November last year, a 200-page document, is in itself a source of excellent advice. I mean, it's really a blueprint or a green print of how to carry out beef farming, suckler beef farming, in a climate-friendly way. It tells you, in principle, what you need to know. Somebody's described it as a manual. Because it's
Cabinet Secretary, with the greatest will in the world, I'm very happy for you to promote somebody else's literature, but we're actually on the budget, so if we can stay on the budget, I would be happy. Do you have a further question on that?
Convener, I think I've established we get that document and some other things for free, and no budget implications. I've finished now, Convener.
Thank you very much. I'd therefore like to move to Richard Lyle. Richard.
Thank you, Convener. I'm now coming on to one of my most favourite subjects. To your credit, Cabinet Secretary, Scotland delivered over 80% of all new tree planting in the UK last year. You planted 22 million more trees last year than anyone else. Yet again, Scotland punching well above its weight. Well done to you and your officials, Cabinet Secretary. Can I ask, the budget provides additional funding for woodland grants to deliver increased planting targets. Will these be targeted to any particular types of woodland, and does any of the additional funding for forestry support the commitment to increase the scale and scope of agroforestry?
Well, thank you, Mr. Lyle. I think the praise of all the people in Scottish Forestry and Forest and Land Scotland is well deserved. They've done a great job for Scotland, and thank you for those comments. They will be appreciated. The additional funding from the Low Carbon Fund of £150 million for forestry over 5 years is, I think, a clear statement of intent, and it will help us drive forward our rising targets for woodland creation, moving from 12 to 18,000 hectares. In answer to your question, we will be supporting and encouraging more of all woodland types, both so-called commercial species and native species, although there is a kind of crossover between the two. Some native species are commercial. We support a variety of schemes, including productive planting models aimed at conifer and broadleaf timber and agri-forestry. We want to do more agri-forestry. I'm working hard on various ways to do that, but we have already achieved a lot with farming groups. More and more farmers are seeing the benefit of forestry. So I think this is a success story, and the real challenge is how do we grow from where we are now, Mr. Lyle, to another 50% of production. And that comes down to more nurseries, helping contractors who've had a bit of a difficult financial time, and generally scaling up the capacity in Scotland to do the work. And that's why I asked SF and FLS to double their planned intake of young people, and they're taking on up to 50 people this year. I think that's a great story from Scotland. Well, I think so anyway.
It's a great story, but we're on the budget. Let's stick on the budget, if I may please drive everyone, including members, to stick on budget and how the budget is being used. So, Mr. Lyle.
Yeah, but if we're spending the money in the right places to grow the right things, that's also in the budget. Right. Can I first finish off by asking how will the pilot regional land use partnerships be funded, Cabinet Secretary?
Well, it's the intention to use the Environment, Climate Change and Land Reform Portfolio programme funding to facilitate pilot establishment and local engagement in 221. So the funding won't come from the RET portfolio for that, it will come from my colleague Ms Cunningham's portfolio.
Thank you very much, Cabinet Secretary. Keep up the good work.
Right, thank you, Mr. Lyle. I'd like to try and bring Emma Harper in. Sorry, Mr. Lyle, I think we need to concentrate on the budget. So I'm going to bring Emma Harper in to bring her question in now. Emma, and then I'll go to the Deputy.
Okay, thanks, Convener, for bringing me in. It was just to highlight that yesterday we took evidence at Health and Sport Committee about the budget, and I know that Food Standards Scotland is part of that portfolio, but it crosses over, and Food Standards Scotland have had an increase of 21.9%, and the budget projection is 19.5 million for 2021-22. So the question yesterday I had for Jean Freeman is would put to Fergus Ewing today about does the government expect that the increased Food Standards Scotland budget will be adequate to allow it to manage the consequences of the EU exit, because we did hear last week in the Rural Committee about the consequences of quitting and Brexit, but the fact that Food Standards Scotland had to be funded and step in order to deal with that. So from a budget point of view, does the Secretary expect that Food Standards Scotland will have adequate funding going forward?
Well, Food Standards Scotland is not a body for which I have portfolio responsibility in terms of its budget management. So I'm not sure, Convener, that I could speak for that, but I can answer the question that Ms Harper raised, which is that it is the case that they have been put to quite a substantial additional cost as a result of all the extra work that's required to deal with the problems that have arisen from Brexit, and in particular seafood exports, and in particular providing help, advice and assistance and operational assistance to DFDS and the other two hubs, O'Toole's and Mescoen, and providing advice, assistance and support by the likes of seminars, digital seminars for businesses. So there is an additional cost. We're looking at that at the moment. I do think that the UK funding announcement of 20 million I alluded to earlier should be used for these additional costs in principle, whether they're in the private or the public sector. But it's a very fair point, and one that I think we should pursue, but it's not perhaps within my portfolio responsibility to myself find that extra cash.
Okay,
thank you, Cabinet Secretary. Now, the Deputy Convener has got a series of questions, and Maureen, it would be really helpful for me if you could sweep up the ones that Angus was wanting to ask, but now is unable to. So if you could pick those up, I'd be grateful. Maureen.
Thank you, Convener. I think you can probably do it in a couple of questions. Obviously, as a result of the pandemic, we are all looking at building back better and embracing the low carbon economy, and I notice a new budget line for the low carbon economy will provide 3.2 million for, quote, green jobs funding for supply chain development. And we've also noted that there's lines in the HIE budget. And I think part of that was for the Cairngorm funicular that we've already talked about. So I wonder what specific jobs you see as being created from this fund, which will help deliver the green economy, Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I think across the range there's a whole series of opportunities, and you mentioned HIE. HIE are extremely active of the creation of jobs in the renewable energy supply chain, for example, and some of the work that they do with major companies that are involved in either providing maintenance to offshore wind or fabrication work in respect of that. So that's one area, but there are all the other sectors of improving green performance really across the board in construction, of course in farming and forestry, the decarbonisation of heating, upgrading the electricity network, the rollout of charging points. So there's a whole variety of areas in which we need to be more sustainable and reduce emissions and introduce facilities such as charging points, which will enable people to do that. So I think there's a large number of possibilities that exist for the utilisation of this money.
I'm finding it quite difficult to identify what a green job is, and how do you identify a new green job in the rural economy specifically, which would be able to use some of this 3.2 million?
Well, I think it's a fair point. I mean, I think some jobs are obviously in peatland restoration. I mean, I don't think there'd be any doubt about that. Some work in farming may or may not be defined as a green job. I think increasingly I would answer the question by saying that across the whole range of government activity, there is now a requirement to meet emission reduction, and therefore every area in construction and transportation and heating and energy, we will all require to see the greening of processes, if you see what I mean. I mean, even oil and gas companies, I was reading that some production companies, and these would not be regarded as green jobs, that companies are now reporting a massive reduction in flaring. So the people that are doing the reduction in flaring, are they doing green jobs? I would say probably yes, because they're making a direct contribution to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So I think there's a fluidity about the definition. And also, some jobs may be partly green, if you like, and partly not, or part of somebody's time may be spent on activities which are demonstrably to improve environmental standards, but other parts of their job may not be. I don't think we should be too hung up on the definition itself. I think we should stand back and look at what are we trying to achieve overall, and recognise that across the board, across even industry, much of what is being done at the moment willingly by companies is to go green in many different ways, and we should encourage them, not, if you like, create a very narrow definition which then excludes our ability to work and collaborate with private sector companies. That would be my personal view about this, at any rate.
Okay, thank you for that. And just finally, as well as building back better and building back greener, we talk more now about the well-being economy, and I wondered how much, if any, in your portfolio delivers towards the well-being economy. I mean, you and I, in both mental health and your portfolio, helped establish Jim Hume's Rural Mental Health Forum. I just wondered if they're now self-sustaining, or whether you still fund them, for example, of a well-being part of your economy, of your portfolio, sorry.
Yes, I believe that we have continued to provide financial support to the good work that Jim Hume does. But in other ways, we do, I think, contribute funding which is directly intended to promote well-being, and others that are indirect. For example, I met with and then provided additional support to the Royal Society of Agricultural Benevolent Institution that provides assistance to farmers that have mental health or other serious issues. For example, in the recent £7 million grant for inshore fishing vessels and aquaculture processing companies, we provided several £100,000 for the fishermen's missions, specifically to make sure that those individuals who may have particular issues requiring support for their well-being get that support, and we're working with the missions on that at the moment. And finally, in the forestry side, the forestry aims include providing access to the countryside and forest walks for people perhaps with mental health issues as part of recovery process by some outdoor education, participation in pleasant social activity in our forests. And I think the forestry staff that do that are quite proud of that, and great advocates, very enthusiastic for the good work. And I know Ms. Watt has a long-standing interest and a knowledge in this area. So there are several ways in which we're contributing directly, but I think most of the support is indirect by providing support, income support, which is earned by farmers and crofters to help them through. After all, imagine what society would be like with COVID if the rural economy had stopped. The rural economy largely went on and got on with it. Everyone else, I guess, was frustrated and wanted to, but farmers, crofters, the sawmills, the panel products, they all worked hard, and they deserve our support. They got our support. So I do hope that the majority of what we do does contribute to the well-being of people in rural Scotland.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary, and that brings us to the end of this session. So thank you very much for your contribution. Cherie, I'm sorry that the vagaries of communications prevented your contribution, but I'm sure you'll add into the information that the Cabinet Secretary is providing post the meeting. So I'm now going to move on to agenda item 7, which is on public petitions. This is the consideration of 4 public petitions as detailed on our agenda. Now, the committee is invited to consider whether it wishes to take any further action in relation to these petitions as we approach the end of this parliamentary session. The committee may wish to note that if any of these petitions are to remain open, they will be referred back to the Public Petitions Committee to be allocated to relevant committees for consideration in session 6. I'm proposed looking at each petition in order. So I'm going to look at the first one, which is petition 1715, closed containment for salmon farms in Scotland. Now, I believe that John Finney, you wish to say something on this. And what I would say, John, before I bring you in, is I'll go through each of the petitions, and then I will try and summarise the action at the end in relation to all of them. So, John, please come in now.
Thank you, Convener, and as ever, I thank our clerks for the information they have provided. We've had some offline discussion on this as Convener, and I think presentationally we have to consider what the options are. So I think it's entirely right that petition is referred to in our legacy report. I would go further and say that given that we've looked at the wider issues of the fish farm industry, but not been able to specifically address this particular aspect of closed containment, that the petition be kept open. I note that neither of these things would compel any incoming committee, whichever committee it would be and however formed, to take further action. But I think it would send a clear message that we realise, and we know almost every other day there seems to be some issue about the industry, that it's very much a live matter. I note your comment that it would, if it was kept open, it would go to the petition committee to be allocated to a future committee. Well, that, as we know, the aspects of it straddle 2 committees at present. So I think we would need to have a clear understanding that, and it's certainly my view, that there's unfinished work here. So my view would be that, yes, of course, mentioned in the legacy report, but keep the petition open as well. I understand that's not everyone's view, but I think it's important to express that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. Does anyone else wish to make any comments on petition 1715? If not, we'll move on to petition 1703, access to broadband in rural Scotland. Does anyone have any comments on that? Not, then I suggest we move on to petition 1626, regulation of bus services. Now, I think Colin Smith had some comments on that. Colin, are you there?
I'm certainly here, convener. I don't think my camera's on yet. Yeah, that's me now. Thank you very much indeed, convener. I mean, I think it's a very important petition, and well, that the onus is on pointing out that the transport bill has been passed, and we were able to make amendments to that bill to allow for the establishment of municipal bus companies by local authorities. Though the provisions within that part of the bill still haven't been commenced by the Scottish Government, so those powers have not yet been passed to local authorities, never mind the guidance to go with them. So I think it is very much unfinished business. So I would like to see us at the very least write to the Government to stress the importance of making sure those provisions are commenced as soon as possible, so that we do give councils those powers that are very clearly within the transport bill.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to make any comments on petition 1626? Yes, John. Sorry.
Thank you again, convener. I would just like to concur with everything Colin said. It's a bit of a hollow position if we don't have implementation. So I think that course of action would be helpful to push this issue on. So I fully support Colin's comments. Thank you.
Thanks, John. If there's no other comments, I'd turn to petition 1733, human right to adequate food. Does anyone have any comments on that? Right, Colin, you wanted to come in on that. Sorry, Colin.
Thank you again, convener. I mean, again, I think it's important that this work continues for the committee, and certainly it is within the legacy paper going forward. There is a member's bill at present from Elaine Smith on the right to food. Now, that bill is currently going through the parliamentary process, and the chances of it being passed before we go into recess at the end of March, as things currently stand, is obviously going to be very challenging, but it is still very much a live issue that hasn't been resolved. And I think that the fact that the Good Food Nations bill was delayed and put aside by the government, that would have been a key part of this committee's work, and there is commitment from the government, and I'm sure other parties as well, to take that issue forward in the next parliament. So I think it's really important that this issue continues into the next parliament. It may simply be that that's a case of this committee committing or in a legacy paper to emphasise on how important it will be to look at that work in the next parliament.
Okay, I'd like to bring in Emma Harper, and then I'd like to come to the deputy convener. And I know that's slightly out of order, but I think if we go with Emma first, and then Maureen.
Thanks, convener. It's just a quick comment. John Finney used the language of compelling future committees to pick up new programmes or petitions and work. So I just wanted to make sure that we're clear that whatever we put in the legacy report, we're not going to dictate to future committees what programme of work they will take forward. And I support the language that John Finney's using, saying that we're not compelling them, but we need to make sure that the issues that are ongoing would be conveyed to future committees. Thanks.
Thank you, Emma, and the deputy convener, Maureen.
Yeah, thank you, convener. I don't disagree with anything that's been said in terms of the importance of these issues and the likelihood of them being ongoing. But I do think it's important to close the current petitions, because it gives the petitioners the opportunity to take into account what has already happened or not, and what is in the programme for government from a new government in terms of bills and what they're taking forward. I sit on the Standards Committee, and the convener of the Petitions Committee has been to us recently about the number of petitions and the number of petitions by a few people and how it is dealt with in the system. So I think it's important that petitioners are given the opportunity to reflect on what their petition says, which they may want to change given a new government and new government commitments and what's in bills. And I think the Standards convener, when she came to us, was very keen that the petitioners make sure that they engage with the relevant committees and, put in written evidence, and thereby have the chance to come and give evidence to the relevant committee. And I think that's really an important part of the work going forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Maureen. Peter, I'll bring you in briefly, and then I'll see if I can do an accurate summary of all those comments. Peter.
I will be brief. Basically, just to say I very much agree with what Maureen has just said. I think we should close these petitions right now, and I think it's up to the petitioners to put them back into the new government once that new government is formed, and I think that's the right way forward. I'll leave it there.
Okay. Right. Let's see if I can summarise this. First of all, I take the role of petitions in the Parliament as a very important part of parliamentary business, and it's really important that the Parliament is seen to respond to petitions and to give the petitioner the correct outcome as far as their petitioner and a fair hearing. And I think we have, in a lot of cases, given a fair hearing to all of the petitions that we're talking about here. But a lot of them are unfinished business. But they're unfinished because we've come to the end of this session. And what's important is that we make sure that our legacy report brings them to the attention of the future committee. I think Emma is entirely right. It is not for us to dictate the future actions of a committee. The committee, in the same way as we did when we started this session, sat down and worked out our work. So if I may suggest, seek committee's approval, that we put all of them in our legacy report so that the future committees is aware of them. As far as petition 1715 is concerned, I note your comment, John, to keep it open, but that is not a universal comment across the committee. So I would suggest that we write to the Scottish Government relating to the closed containment of salmon farms and draw the Scottish Government's attention to the report that we published where this was actually mentioned in there, and make sure that that information is passed on to future governments. As far as access in rural broadband is concerned, I think, again, we should write to the Scottish Government indicating the importance to it. And as far as the regulation of bus services, as Colin said, these provisions are within the bill, but they have not been commenced. So again, I think we should write to the Scottish Government and say the importance that we have, that we consider the provisions and the commencement. Will the future government consider those? And finally, the importance on the human right to adequate food. Say that we note that, unfortunately, and writing to the Scottish Government to say that we note the Good Food Nation bill should have come forward, and we still consider it important, and especially in relation to this petition. So on each of them, we would write to the Scottish Government, but I do believe the best way to deal with them is to close them and write to the petitioners, or let the petitioners know that it is their absolute right to bring them back in the next session, reflecting on what the new government, whoever that may be's, progress and business is, so that these are taken into account. Now, I hope that's a fair summary. Is everyone happy with that? If anyone's not happy, can I ask you raise your hands? So no one's raising their hands, so we will close the petitions. but we will write to the government on each of these issues, and we will make sure they're in our legacy paper. Thank you very much, committee, for that. The next meeting of the committee will be on the 24th of February, which will be stage 2 of the Dogs Protection of Livestock Amendment Bill, where Emma will be sitting on the other side of the table, so as to speak. We will also be doing climate change plan, the consideration of our letter on in relation to the evidence session. I'm pleased to inform you we will have 3 SSIs and 1 SI to consider as well. And more details of the meeting will become available once the agenda is published. So that concludes our committee's business today, and I'd like to thank you all for attending and taking part. Thank you very much.